Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of our podcast, Dragonspotting, a show where we watch media that has dragons in it, and then we tell you about them. I'm
And then
Heather.
I'm Diana. We forgot to do pronouns.
No,
I,
it's fine. You wanted to introduce yourself, so you jumped right in. I'm Heather. My pronouns are she and they.
I'm Diana. I'm a they any kind of situation.
Yeah, and yeah, we are. Uh, how would you describe us? Connoisseurs of media?
Connoisseurs of trash and delights all across the media landscape, I would say.
Yeah, and boy, do we have some delightful trash for you today. I hesitate to call it trash though, because this particular film has a special place in my heart, and that, of course, is the Dungeons and Dragons movie from the year of our Lord 2000 and nothing, as you so eloquently put it before in our botched recording.
Don't mention it. It's dead to us. It's in the ground, sleeping
Yeah.
very politely.
Yeah, only the intro though. So everything you our listeners are getting now is certified fresh. Unlike this
Certified.
movie.
Did you write down what its Rotten Tomatoes percentage is?
I didn't, but I can check real quick. According to Rotten Tomatoes, 9% on the tomato meter and
Jesus.
20% on the popcorn meter, which is the audience score. Those of you familiar with Rotten Tomatoes.
See, I thought both of those would be a little bit higher. Now I just
Really?
feel mean.
Oh no.
Surely,
Surely.
surely more people are charmed by this movie, as I am not particularly, just to get it right out in front of us right away.
Well, I said that this movie has a special place in my heart because once I got into D&D proper, I ended up discovering this movie just purely by happenstance while like looking up stuff about D&D. And I got together with my D&D group at the time and we watched it and it was a fucking hoot. We thought it was hilarious. We had a lot of fun with it, and eventually I reintroduced this D&D movie with my other D&D group, who now comprise some of our closest friends in our friend circle. So this movie has a special spot in my heart. Upon rewatch, that opinion may have shifted slightly. This film, as it turns out, not as fun to watch on your own.
Yeah, and I am very excited that I finally got a chance to watch it after knowing about it for years, knowing its reputation as not a very good movie but a fun time, and having seen it, I can place myself firmly in the camp of I didn't really like this very much at all, but also I still think that you should watch it specifically with a group of people. Because, as you said, watching this on my own after watching it with you and not liking it all that much was an infinitely inferior experience. But also at the same time, I think that this is a good movie to watch with a lot of other people, and preferably, maybe with a little bit of a substance in you.
Yeah, I strongly agree. You were smart enough to have a substance in you on your rewatch when we had to take notes on this.
I will talk about it later, but having a substance in me and also watching this movie in a very specific way made it infinitely more tolerable, and I will talk about that when we get there because I think
Of
it'll be
course.
fun to kind of save my state of mind for when we come to that part of our discussion of it.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, now let's talk a bit about this film because as most people are probably aware of like the Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out much more recently and was much better received. Honor Among Thieves, I believe it was called.
Yes.
This movie is kind of the origin of Dungeons and Dragons being adapted to film, and it is sort of the responsibility of one Courtney Solomon, who was the producer, and I want to say he directed this.
Yes, he did direct
Yeah,
it.
he was the director and producer. So Courtney Solomon got his start in the film industry in connection with his mother, who was a production coordinator on like television shows in Canada. And this gave him, familiarity with the industry, but also kind of I would say, brash confidence, because he skipped going to film school because he didn't think he needed it, and
Uh-huh.
immediately jumped into production of his dream D&D movie when he was like 19.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like 19 to 20. So
Okay.
really early.
This
Like,
this is very exciting.
yeah. And it's pretty funny. He got his in with TSR, which was D&D's original publishing company. I want to say it was like Gygax's publishing company.
Okay.
But yeah, he got his in with them by pretending to be working on a school economics project. He called them up to like ask them about making a Dungeons and Dragons movie under the premise that he was doing it for film school, which again, I reiterate, he never attended.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, we love a liar in this house.
Yeah, but he sort of found out that TSR was very finicky and particular about, film rights, because they felt that most of the studios that made offers to them didn't get D&D. And Courtney, being like a big fan of the property, was like, I get D&D. I could do it. And the film was first conceived of in 1990. It took 18 months of negotiation with TSR, and he eventually won them over with like a huge royalty offer. I wasn't able to find the exact number, but apparently it was bigger than any other studio had offered them up to that point. And Courtney wanted to make a $100 million theatrical production, eventually branching it off into a trilogy and making it, and this is a direct quote, the Star Wars of fantasy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So,
Heather, Heather, every single piece of information that you've dropped thus far on my head in this, knowing what the actual movie has turned out to be is very fucking funny.
it's almost, what's the term for like a tragedy that's funny? Because
A
I think,
tragic comedy.
yeah, tragic comedy where tragedy becomes farce. Because it's almost kind of sad how excited everybody involved in this was to make it. And spoiler alert, audience, it does not do well. But
Oh.
yeah, after the 18 months of negotiation, Courtney Solomon starts getting, more producers involved in this. One, Alan Zeman, an investor from Hong Kong, really believes in the project. He gives its initial financial backing. And this is where TSR starts getting finicky again. They don't want a $100 million theatrical production. They want a $3.5 million direct-to-video movie.
Yeah.
And for a while that looks like what's going to happen, because they're not getting a lot of money for this after all. But in 1997, TSR and D&D are acquired by Wizards of the Coast, who make a big stink about the production not being a quote real film.
Oh.
The project's saved, though, by the joining of the producer Jonathan Silver, known for movies like Die Hard, which brings it another $30 million investment. His name being
Jesus.
attached to it is a big boost to them.
Uh-huh.
They don't get to do the 100 million they initially planned, but this ended up being the biggest budget independent film of the time, with a total budget of 35 to 45 million. On Wikipedia, it's listed as having a budget of 45 million, but in interviews I've seen with the director and other people who worked on the film, they say 35 million is the definite number. So
Okay.
like a third to half as much as they initially planned. They really had to tighten their belts for this film. They filmed entirely in the Czech Republic, mainly Prague, so they were able to film things for a lot cheaper than they would in America. But this brought with it its own problems. The special effects supervisor George Gibbs, who won an Oscar for his work on Temple of Doom,
Oh my god.
described the Czechs as being too communist. The Czech Republic having been only, I think, a decade out from leaving the Soviet Union at this point.
Yeah.
And this was, as he put it, not conducive to the production at all. They were having trouble, like, getting certain parts and technology and things through customs. The makeup supervisor, Martin Astles, hated it, and the crew struggled overall. One particular thing that comes up in interviews is they weren't able to get the correct adhesive for the elf ears they were using in the production, which is why I think you don't see a lot of elves, and the elf ears don't quite look right in some scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a very ambitious project, kind of too ambitious for its own good. At some point, they were trying to get directors like Francis Ford Coppola, James
No.
Cameron, Rennie
No.
Harlan, and Stan Winston. They were all attached for directing, but all dropped out.
Yeah, and they should.
Yeah, James Cameron wanted to work on this, but it was like right before he did Titanic.
Yeah, that's not. No, 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 no.
I think the takeaway from this is they really wanted this to be special, and in my opinion, a lot of ways it was. You can definitely see all $45 million in this movie.
Yep.
The practical and special effects, the costume work, the makeup, all very fun. I think they actually do a very good job in that department. In others, not so much.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Before we get into talking about this movie, though, you mentioned, stuff about the fantasy races. So I did a little bit of digging, through interviews and all that. And this movie has its own, like, unique setting. But it is
Okay.
based on, specifically, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition rules, which was the current edition at the time. Although, third edition, I think, came out right when this movie released.
I was about to say because D&D has been around since the 70s and it's only taken like
Yeah.
25 years to go from 3rd to 5th edition. That's interesting.
Yeah, third edition was the first time Wizards of the Coast was publishing D&D. So that's sort of
Gotcha.
where there was kind of the start of like the kind of ideological shift in what D&D was and what direction they were going with it.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Because third edition was a big change. Third edition was like the introduction of the D20 system.
Oh, okay.
But anyways, it's based on the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition rules, and very loosely based on the existing setting of Mystara. And there's a couple key points here where you can see that. For example, in the film, there are two moons that appear. This is a feature of Mystara. There's no mention of any kind of god, but one of the characters does name drop the Immortals, which are sort of ascended beings in that setting, and they apparently live on the moon. So, a
Oh.
fun fact there.
Oh,
And
okay.
as you were talking about fantasy races before, there is a distinction in Mystara between, like, human and non-human civilizations. And Izmir, the place this movie takes place in, which is a made-up place, is based specifically on Alphatia, which is an empire of mages from the original Mystara setting.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But adaptation was kept, like, really loose. Things like spells and monsters were changed to be more visually compelling. And a lot of stuff was made up so audiences didn't have to rely on a familiarity to the pre-existing settings, which, as I think you noted when we were talking about this together when watching it, kind of backfired.
Yes. I think this is a good time for me to get this specific complaint out of the way. And actually, before I say that, do you want to, Heather, in your own words, give just a brief summary of what this movie is about. Largely,
Uh,
I'm putting this on you because I struggle to come up with one.
yeah. You know what? I'm going to be lazy and read out, because I did write this down, the little introduction speech they give you at the very start of the movie, which is, hey, extremely Star Wars. The only thing it's missing is scrolling text. But yeah, the Empire of Izmir has long been divided, ruled by magic users. Oh, sorry. I actually didn't write this down word for word now that I'm looking at my notes, because I described the non-magic user as shit-cast commoners. And then in quotes, basically slaves, which is a direct quote from there. They do specifically say this cast of non-magic users are basically slaves.
Okay.
The young Empress Savina wishes equality and prosperity for all, and the evil mage Profian has other intentions for the Empire. So, like, this is a very standard, I think, political plot of, oh, shit's bad, but a group of young idealists within the system are working towards change, but an evil, I guess in this case, conservative force is working against that.
Yeah. It's okay. Right away, I am going to poke and prod at this introduction. Hey, fun fact, this isn't actually what the movie is about. The movie is about a group of adventurers who stumble haphazardly into this conspiracy plot and now have to save the land. It
With a
is
MacGuffin.
with a MacGuffin. It is, hey, hi, I am a fantasy writer. This is bad fantasy writing. It is fully plot driven, but even in a plot driven thing, you need to have characters who are motivated. And I don't just mean motivated in the sense of, well, if I don't do this thing, I'm gonna get my ass kicked or whatever. These characters are not intrinsically motivated to do anything in this movie. And it really sucks to watch because it is some of the least compelling fantasy writing that I've ever seen put to film.
Some of them aren't even extrinsically motivated to do things.
No, it's true, and we'll get into that. But oh my goodness, when I rewatched this to take notes on it, and I got to the intro again, I was ready to scream because one, again, it tells you nothing about what the story is actually going to be. It is background information that they think that you need in order to understand what's going on. But then they explain it to you again within 10 minutes in a much more interesting way. So I don't understand what the intro is supposed to be doing here, except oopsie daisies.
Well,
No, this is the Star Wars of fantasy, so of course they need to have an intro crawl, but it's not even an intro crawl, it's just them exposizing to you. It's very silly.
yeah, it's pretty silly. I think part of this comes from the fact that this movie was being written and run like a game of D&D.
No.
In a lot of the interviews, they refer to Courtney Solomon as the dungeon master of the film. Like, the actors refer to him that way. He doesn't really deny the title at all.
Okay.
But as someone who has played D&D since 3.5, I can see the D&D in this. This does feel like a game of D&D, specifically like a homebrewed game of D&D. You can kind of see the fingerprints all over it, but that's also not exactly helping it as a film.
It's also, I will make the argument that this is a homebrew D&D done by a dungeon master who doesn't entirely know what they're doing and is also very focused on their story before allowing the players to make the story their own. I guess the point that I'll make before we move on is, well and truly, I think D&D is better now and more fun to play, and all of what we just talked about are contributing factors to not only this movie not being fun to watch even in the time it came out, but also why it really fails to hold up nowadays, even more so than it did back then. You know, this This feels like when I first played D&D with my friends for the first time when we were in high school and college and didn't know what we were doing. And we just had one of those like pre-written quests, and the dungeon master was so focused on getting us into the next room that they were getting mad at us for like every time we came across anything being like, I kick this thing, I try to blow it up, I search it to see if there's clues, and then eventually getting yelled at, there are no clues in the stupid barrel, please do anything else. Like, that's what this movie feels like to me, except the dungeon master isn't even letting them go through the barrels. The dungeon master is saying, please follow the purple man through the market, please.
The purple man.
The purple man, or the creature, as subtitles call him. We'll get there.
Yeah. I think we need to stop saying we'll get there and just kind of get there.
And just get there.
Yeah. Let's get into the summary of this.
Yeah. We open. Yeah. We open with terrible... Actually, the narration is not bad. The narration is not bad. That's kind of something that I'll put out there right at the front of this. Nobody's acting is the worst thing I've ever seen. I think the issue, and this is a bit of wisdom that has been passed down, all of the performances, for the most part, are on an equal level of overacted and not very good. And when you have something like that, that is not the fault of the actors. It is the fault of the direction that they are given. This narration is not the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
But it is a very goofy thing that they are reading, and it makes me grin from ear to ear, but like in a way where I'm gritting my teeth, and I'm like upset about it.
Yeah. And then this intro immediately goes into an epic score. Not quite Star Wars, but very clearly we're trying to do Star Wars here.
Yeah.
Not that it sounds like Star Wars music, but it's like, this is our Star Wars score moment where, you know, the title crawl happens and you go into the music and you get excited for this opening shot, which looks like an Oblivion cinematic cutscene. It is very poorly aged 2000 CG, and this shot apparently took 4 months.
Oh my god. I will not complain too much about the CG of this movie because I am delighted by it. I love me some shitty 2000 CG. What I will knock them for is the way that the sinister little prologue that they do goes into this cheery, upbeat adventure music. It's so totally dissonant, and it made me smile every time I watch this movie.
Yeah. This movie has some interesting tonal shifts,
yes.
I would say. But,
yes.
You know, this Oblivion cutscene happens. We're taking over this big sweeping shot of the city of Sumdal around these towers and this big open, I guess, harbor, you would call it.
It's a harbor.
And we get a sort of flying helicopter shot down into the sewers where some Frankenstein shit is happening.
We get our first fun set of the movie where it's very clearly a soundstage that they decorated the fuck out of.
Yeah.
It's very much soundstage fantasy, but it feels like coming home to a certain extent.
It's so fun. I love this shit, and that's kind of why I think the CG feels so jarring next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very, like, tangible, the practical sets and all that. They've got spinning cogs, dudes with bellows and chains. They got a big, cool, like, astrolabe spinning around a weird stick.
Yeah, we don't know what the stick is, but it's very funny when we find out what the stick is, because you quickly realize that the spinning around is doing nothing. It's just there to look cool.
Yeah, it's very fun. It's almost like looking at, like, a playground of just cool shit, and I don't know, it's fun. It makes me smile. I love it when movies have practical sets and things that actors are, like, physically touching and moving around, and you can hear the grinding of the cogs and the moving of the bellows. I don't know. It grounds the set in a way that I feel like the CGI didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, what do I know?
Yeah.
And as we, you know, go through this set, we see these, like, black hooded figures kind of all milling about and whatnot until we pan over and we see the main villain of this story, Jeremy Irons, ladies and gentlemen, playing the
Jeremy
evil
Irons.
mage Profian, and he walks down these stairs and instantly sets the tone for this character. He is like holding his arms out spread, and he is just immediately hamming it up and chewing the fuck out of the scenery. It's great. I'm delighted by his performance in this movie.
He is eating the scenery up like fucking popcorn. It is delightful. He's wearing this gay little cloak when we first see him. All of his outfits in the movie, just like across the board, are fantastic. He looks great.
Yeah.
He walks down because this is the first shot we see of him. He goes up to the dumb little astrolabe that's spinning and he grabs the staff out of it.
Well, hang on.
And...
First.
Oh, okay.
I have to interrupt you. First, he shoots some lightning at the staff, and we see illusory dragons materialize around it. And if we want to count those as dragons, that's a time to dragon of 2 minutes and 8 seconds. But I think we have a better time to dragon. I think we do.
Yeah.
Because he's doing magic on this stick that
weighs nothing.
Yeah, it weighs nothing. This particular prop, they kind of reuse similar props throughout the movie because we'll get into it, but this is basically the start of what the MacGuffin is and does. He does magic on this. We don't know what it is, but he looks pretty pleased about it. He looks incredibly pleased about it. Jeremy Irons constantly looks like he is about to bust in this movie.
He takes this thing off the astrolabe and, like, sighs and flutters his eyes. It is a nutty performance, and I mean that quite literally.
He makes, like, a real intense, like, throaty growl, like, whenever he is making this face. And I am not joking when I say it looks like he is about to come. Like, every time he does it.
He looks like he's gonna cream his funny velvet wizard pants. It's great.
But yeah, over his shoulder as he's doing this, we see his blue-lipped sidekick, Damodar, who is wearing blue lipstick throughout this entire movie, and it's never really addressed. It's just kind of part of his character appearance. I saw in your notes you have a theory about this.
I have a theory. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. But Jeremy Irons is like, "Come, Damodar," and they walk up the stairs, and their minions start opening this big iron gate. And as it goes up, we see a gold dragon, massive, full proper dragon, and that's a time to dragon of about 324, I think, is what I wrote down.
That's also what I have written down.
Yeah.
This is a dragon spotted. We have spotted our first dragon.
This is a dragon spotted, and it is a dragon in captivity. It sort of comes out, it looks agitated, but Profian uses the staff he was just shooting lightning at to try and control it. All of his mooks are kind of running around in a panic, and there's a really cool fire stunt where a guy gets lit on fire and has to fling himself down the stairs. And it's real. They really did that.
I'm so glad we both had that written down.
Yeah. So he's trying to control the dragon with this counterfeit staff that he has constructed. And this is where the name drop of the Immortals comes in, because Damodar says to Jeremy Irons, or Profian, I should say, "You have the power of the Immortals. You can control dragons." And Profian kind of lays out his evil plan of he wants to do this to overthrow the Empress. And I wrote in my notes, he makes a weird fucking noise here, which I want to say it's like a weird Hannibal Lecter noise. He goes like,
or I'm so glad the recording did not like that, but we'll roll with it.
Oh yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see how that sounds. But anyway, the dragon breaks the staff with its mind. His staff is too shitty. And then Profian recreates the Rancor scene from Star Wars where he crushes the dragon with the gate.
Yeah. And it's very sad.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes, PS2 blood VFX.
Yeah, no, the dragon, in my opinion, does not look bad at all until it starts bleeding CGI blood, and then it's comedic. Then it's very funny.
It's some very tech demo-ass blood. And when it enters the water like boils and lights on fire. Practically at first, but then into really bad looking CGI fire that sort of bursts out of the sewer and spreads across the water as Profian talks to Damodar and says, well, we can't do a hard coup anymore, so we're going to try a soft coup instead. There's a council of mages, and he's going to tell them that the Empress is a liberal.
Yeah. Although this part of it, where the water gets set on fire, leads us into a shot where we see our heroes for the first time in one of the least, like, compelling hero shots of all time.
Yeah, they're just kind of there in a crowd of people looking at this river light on fire.
And he basically says, like, see, this is why the mages suck, like, or something along those lines. Like, this is what mages do, is they light our water on fire.
They don't care if anyone gets hurt, and they discuss class war for a little bit.
Yeah. It's not the worst exposition of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, this is a forgivable exposition where it's like, oh, okay, so we understand there is a class war going on, specifically between mages and commoners, which is a very funny way to distinguish magic users and non-magic users. I like it a lot, but in a way where I find it funny.
Yeah. So our two protagonists, Ridley and Snails, they're discussing things, and Snails has a very funny line that I kind of like here. Snails has a lot of funny lines, I think, and his actor does a good job of delivering them.
I made the same notes of Snails' actor is one of the best ones in the movie, but he's given very bad, wonky material, and so he's kind of forced to just overact everything.
Yeah, he's discussing with Ridley. He's kind of apathetic to the system. He doesn't think that they have much power to change it. He says, now Ridley, there's haves, have-nots, and gotta gets. And right now, we gotta get paid. To which Ridley immediately suggests robbing the magic school, this big-ass, towering, cathedral-like building. And Snails is a coward, but also very easily swayed.
Yes.
So, we have them looking up at this tower, and they're like, the magic school. That'll be like a huge payout. With the fire going on, it will be guarded less because they're going to deal with the river being on fire. And we cut from that back to Jeremy Irons, who is now dressed like a prosperity gospel preacher and is in a big Prague opera house trying to convince the Wizard Parliament that the Empress is too liberal to be trusted to stay in power.
Yeah, and for the most part, it appears that the Parliament is agreeing. And the way that they're going to strip her, they end up cheering at the end. They cheer at the end.
Yeah, there are some people who are very funnily insisting that there's nothing to worry about because, one, people get more conservative as they get older anyways, and also it's super easy to manipulate a child.
Yeah, because I don't know if we mentioned it up to this point, Savina is a child. Like, her actress is 13, 14 at oldest. The way that they plan to strip this power from her is taking her staff, which we quickly kind of glean in this movie, because the movie explains the power struggle at the beginning in the opening narration, which we are relearning in more detail right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever fully explains that the staff that she wields specifically controls gold dragons, which are good dragons, and then we later, when she's talking to one of her advisors about the whole thing, because he's revealing to her, hey, they're trying to strip you of your power, that's when we learn about the Rod of Seville, which I don't think they ever fully explain, but it does control red dragons, which are evil dragons.
Yeah. We'll get to that.
We're there. We're there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the point being, so the Empress has the real staff that Profian was trying to make a counterfeit of. And because Wizard Parliament wants to take it from her, she goes to talk to her advisor. And I wrote that she has a cool outfit, and you agree that a lot of her outfits in this movie are very cool. It's some of the better costume design, I think. But one of the character traits I wrote down about this Empress is she is incredibly naive and doesn't seem to understand she is running an empire.
Correct.
Because her big thing is like, oh, why can't people have equal rights and standing? And the reason being you are running an empire, and an empire can't be run like that.
You are literally the Empress.
Yeah, you are the Empress. You could give people equal rights, but then also the political situation here is not very well thought out. I'll just leave it at that.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be, but I do think this is kind of where one of the ways that this movie shows its ass is, why is she called the Empress if you want there to be a democratic ruling system? Because that very much seems like what they're actually pointing to.
It feels very Star Wars, specifically Episode 1, where we have Queen Amidala, who is elected queen by her people.
Whoa, Heather, this movie bears some simile to Star Wars I would have never guessed, considering it's the Star Wars of fantasy.
Hey, when
That's
the fuck
crazy.
did Episode 1 come out? When the hell did Star Wars Episode 1 come out? I'm actually curious. I need to check this.
It's the late 90s. I want to say
99.
it's like 98 or 99. Yeah.
1999, so distinctly before this film.
Yes.
Granted, they were in production since 1990, but the script had like a lot of rewrites, and I think it was rewritten completely once they finally got to shooting.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. Anyways, the Empress's advisor tells her, as you mentioned, about the Rod of Savril, and he does say it controls red dragons. And their solution to this problem of the council taking away her nuclear football is to just get a different, better nuclear football.
Yep. Yeah, because that's how you solve all your problems.
Yeah. And as the advisor is telling her about this, he's like, oh, I've got a scroll that has a map to the Rod of Savril. We'll just get that one. Immediately, there's a very jarring, like, zoom out to this little CGI imp creature that overhears this conversation, vanishes, and immediately we cut to Jeremy Irons, like, freaking out, and he's like, oh, I must have that staff. I must have the Rod of Savril, and immediately switches back to the hard coup plan.
Yeah.
And he tells Damodar to go get the scroll from the advisor and also kill him.
Good time to mention also that Profian's slutty little lair where he likes to hang out is the Prague Bone Church.
Yes, the Celtic ossuary.
Like, they're just filming in the Bone Church. I know what it's called. It's the Bone Church, and they're filming it in. If you've never seen this thing, look it up. It is a church made out of human skeletal remains. It is scary and awesome, and it's just in this fucking movie.
Yeah, this is actually the first time it was ever used in a feature film, and it was constructed from specifically the remains of people who died of the Black Plague. So there are a lot of bones there.
Yeah, it's what an honor for this movie to be the first to feature the cool ossuary in Prague. I'm sure that the honor is not felt in the same way on the other side of things.
Yeah. It works very well as like an evil wizard lair.
It does.
Yeah. But anyways, that very rapid set of scenes that kind of just go bam, 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 cut back to Snails and Ridley kind of climbing into the tower. And Snails says, why don't we just rob God while we're up here? Implying that Snails is Christian.
Implying that there is Christianity.
Yeah.
In this fantasy world of Izmir.
Yeah.
Also,
because as I said, there aren't gods in this. There are the immortals.
Yeah, something that I pointed out for the first time here, but it will be a running theme throughout the rest of this movie. Ridley is a terrible friend to Snails. In this particular instance, Ridley, like, climbs out of the window and into the mage school first, lands on the ground. Snails is like, are you going to catch me? And Ridley says yes. And Snails is like, you've let me fall before. And Ridley says, I won't do it now. Snails is like, cool. He lets go. Ridley is instantly distracted and lets Snails fall on the ground. Ridley is a terrible friend.
Yeah, Ridley kind of sucks. A lot of characters in this film kind of suck.
That is the general vibe of this movie is everybody here kind of sucks.
Speaking of characters that kind of suck, we cut immediately from this scene to this librarian-looking girl, Marina, who is helping the advisor with the scroll, and she sort of talks about her sympathy for the Empress's situation, but also she kind of doesn't get the whole equality thing. She's loyal to the Empress, but also she has some very visible prejudices.
She doesn't understand why we need commoners to not be slaves anymore. Because they help her so much to do everything.
Yeah. The advisor is doing tricks on the scroll. He's like throwing powder on it. He's like, oh, Marina, fetch me some manticore wing. The magical lock on this scroll is so hard to decipher. It's made with ancient magic runes and whatnot. As she's helping him, though, they hear heist hijinks, I would say, happening in the other room, which we see Ridley and Snails kind of walking through this set that is just piled with antiques, I would just say, to describe it. Like weird little doodads and things. There's a very fun bit of animatronic creatures in cages in the back, just little like puppets and stuff kind of moving around. Snails picks up one of these artifacts. He's like, oh, we could get something for this, right, Ridley? And he opens it, and an evil skeletal dragon Jack-in-the-Box pops out.
Yeah.
Which is very loud, causes a lot of commotion, and Marina in the other room is like, oh, I should go see what that is.
Yeah, this is the moment that I wrote down in my notes. Snails exist so bad things can happen to him. And he does.
Yeah.
He exists to have the Jack-in-the-Box dragon pop out of him and frighten him.
Yeah, Ridley takes the box from him. He's like, oh, Snails, you fool. It's just an illusion. Haha. And Marina bursts in and is like, oh, who the hell are you guys? You're robbing us. And before they can escape, she casts a tying up spell, which might be like some kind of hold person spell. She casts it using her bracelet. They get tied up, and They trade some banter, I guess you would call it, where Ridley's like, oh, this is the only way she can get guys to come home with her. And she goes, oh, I'd need a feeble mind spell to go home with you. Yeah, I didn't know if you had some opinions on this, as someone who reads. Spoiler alert, this is supposed to be, like, romantic banter of, like, oh, enemies to enemies. Because she also says anyone trying to rob the magic school would have to be extremely brave and then falters. And the implication being, extremely stupid and then falters, because the implication is she's about to say incredibly brave, implying that she's like already impressed with this guy.
Yeah, every single bit of dialogue that passes between these two is worse than they think it is. I'm gonna steal a quote from a book that I read recently that's also not very good, but I think it makes a good point. If this movie was half as funny or clever or witty as it thinks it is, it would be twice as funny as it is now, unfortunately. Because this is some of the weakest fucking shit passed off as banter that I've ever heard. Again, I'm delighted by it. I think this movie actually is perfect now that I'm talking about it.
It's, if nothing else, it is very fun to watch.
Correct.
Anyways, Marina captures them and is like, oh, you're thieves. I'm gonna take you to the dungeon. And Ridley implies that capital punishment is very commonplace even for petty crime. Because he says, oh, you'll have a good view from your tower when they cut off my head. So, this society is kind of fucked.
Yeah. So this is the point, though, that we hear commotion from the library that Marina just came from. And we run in to find, oh no, Blue Lipstick Man. He has the...
Damodar.
Damodar, he has the guy. I wrote his name down. It's Vilden. It doesn't matter because
It doesn't
Damodar is here
matter.
to kill him.
Yeah, Damodar specifically, and Damodar does this throughout the movie. He's like threatening the life of this person and says, if you tell me what I want, I may consider killing you quickly rather than slowly and painfully. And the advisor doesn't do this. He sort of levitates the scroll over to Marina, and Damodar, not true to his word, just kind of snaps his neck.
Yeah. It is not a death that is slow or painless, because that was his whole thing is, I might make it so that you don't die painfully. Bitch, he snapped his neck.
Yeah.
He felt pain for maybe an instant, and now he's dead.
Yeah. Snails actually recognizes Damodar. At least I think it's Snails. And he recognizes him as the head of the Crimson Brigade, which, as far as I can tell, the implication is they're like the Imperial Guard. So Damodar is supposedly, this very high-ranking person who works very closely with the Empress, but he's doing bad shit here.
Yeah. Also, this is the point in my notes that I remembered when we watched it the first time. This will be a running theme throughout Dragonspotting called Diana recognizes someone in the cast from a shitty horror movie. At this point, it was the main character, Ridley, is played by the same actor who played teen Andy Barclay in Child's Play 3, where he goes to military school and Chucky ships himself in a fucking box to military school, but Andy doesn't open up the box because he's not a child anymore. He's like 16.
Right.
God. That's this guy. And his career is very weird.
You know what? Actually, this is a good time to talk a little bit about the casting choices for this film. Because you talk about, when we were watching it, you talked about how it felt like underwhelming, I think was the sentiment you expressed. Because these people they cast are kind of just regular ass people. That was done very intentionally. The philosophy behind the casting was Courtney Solomon wanted to cast people that looked like people who would play D&D, who would be players. Like, very generally not big name actors. For Ridley specifically, he wanted someone who was not a movie star but looked like he could be, which is why Ridley is done up like a poor man's Leonardo DiCaprio in this.
He's got 90s pretty boy hair for sure.
He does. But yeah, that's kind of why the main cast is made up of people who are not big names. He was very much trying to do a George Lucas, because the people in Star Wars were not really big names at the time when they were cast, except for a handful of people, like like Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan, and in this case, Jeremy Irons, who at the time I believe was an Oscar-winning actor.
Yeah, and didn't you say the reason Jeremy Irons took on this role was for his grandkids who enjoy D&D?
Well, he was the last person to agree to be on the project, or the last actor. Yeah, basically he was like, oh, I asked my sons about it. His sons, I think it was, not his grandchildren. Okay. Which I don't know if he had any at the time, but he was like, I remember my sons mentioning it, and when I asked them, they said, oh, it's a good game, so I decided to do it.
That's very fun. Like, and that's the reason.
Boy, does he do it.
He sure does. He wants to do it with everything he comes across.
He is doing the fucking most throughout this movie.
It's great.
Yeah. But yeah, back to the plot. Marina gets them away by casting some spells, and not to do another aside, but as we mentioned earlier that this was done based on the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules, we can kind of get an idea for what class and level these characters, what they supposedly have to be given what they are doing in this movie. So I had to go through some advanced Dungeons & Dragons books to try and piece this together. It looks like Marina casts 2 spells in this scene. Chain lightning on the big group of enemies. She shoots out these like balls of lightning that connect and spread out throughout the entire group, which to me feels very Chain Lightning, which is a 6th level spell. And then she gets away by casting like a portal that kind of opens, and she drags herself and Ridley and Snails, who are still attached to her because of the bracelet spell she cast earlier. They all get dragged through this portal, which I identify as being a take on Dimension Door, which is a 4th level spell. And we can determine that she is some kind of wizard, specifically a mage or a generalist wizard. Mages don't get access to 6th level spell slots until level 12, implying that Marina is at minimum a level 12 mage, which is kind of up there.
Yeah. And makes something that gets said later very, very funny.
Yeah. But anyways, they get away and fall into a big pile of garbage.
And in this big pile of garbage, they find another big piece of garbage, which is Elwood, the dwarf.
Elwood the dwarf. He will do nothing for the entire duration of this film. Except what he does right here.
Yeah, and we, well and truly, we mean fucking nothing.
Yeah, it's almost comedic how little Elwood does in this movie. But he rises out of this garbage, which is directly under a no dwarves allowed sign. But Elwood rises from this garbage, big ginger beard and Viking horned helmet, big axe. And as he gets up, someone, the Crimson Guard, or whatever they were called, shoots a crossbow bolt at him, and it knocks his helmet off, revealing that he's bald. And he gets very upset that this has been revealed, and he goes into a rage, kind of indicating Elwood is the barbarian of this party, or at very least some kind of fighter.
Yeah.
But he's like, oh, you shouldn't have did that, and he walks up to Damodar, who he tries to attack with his axe. Damodar breaks out like a Wolverine claw gauntlet, blocks the blow easily, and kind of bitch smacks him around a bit. And they all kind of just flee and escape into the sewers together, which, by the way, they slide down this sewer thing. And I found out in the interviews, they filmed this in a real sewer in Prague.
Oh.
This was,
why?
I'm guessing it was an old, maybe a medieval sewer that wasn't being used for sewage anymore. I hope. But apparently they filmed this in a real honest-to-God sewer. This wasn't a constructed slide or set.
Oh my god. Well, I hope they had fun.
They get away, but not before they are framed for the murder of the advisor. So Marina, Ridley, and Snails, and I don't think Elwood is involved in this overall plot at all, which makes it very funny that he is continuing to just hang around them. He's kind of just here.
I almost want to say that the only wanted poster we see is of Marina, and that's when we get the reveal that she's Marina of Potenza specifically.
Yeah, and she refers to herself as an aristocrat, and that she's too good to be framed for murder. And Ridley kind of gloats at this. He calls her a low-level mage, which, as we've established, he's fucking wrong about, but also is kind of very pleased that the system that she supports is immediately throwing her under the bus.
It is. So next what we get to is Damodar returns to Protean.
Prothean.
Prothean. Sorry, I want to call this man Proton so bad. That's what his name looks like. I think I was writing his name down as Protean in my notes.
That's whatever. Pretty funny.
Damodar returns to Prothean, and Prothean's all pissy because he's like, no, you let them get away when they saw you kill this guy.
And also, the Empress is sending her best tracker after them. And this tracker is loyal to the Empress and not Prothean, so she will tell on us.
And also they have the scroll, etc., etc. He's pissed at Damodar, and to encourage Damodar not to fuck up again, He turns him into a protagonist from Baldur's Gate
Yeah,
3 and
that's what
sticks a worm
yeah.
in his brain.
I wrote in my notes, Damodar becomes the protagonist of Gate 3. Profian is the absolute, and he cups his bald head like a basketball. It's
It's true.
it's very it's intriguing. So in interviews, this is referred to as a mind flayer. This is their take on a mind flayer that Profian puts inside Damodar's head to sort of compel him to do better at his job.
Yes. And the effects when the mind flare goes into his, like, the worms look bad, they're CG, it's whatever.
It's CG.
But throughout the rest of this movie, we do get a very cool makeup effect where surrounding his ears and then gradually over time, like it grows onto his neck and like onto the top of his head, he has these red pulsing veins and
Yeah.
just like a general redness of the skin that shows the progression of being mind flared and the
Yeah.
toll that it's taking on him. It's a very good slight detail.
Yeah, it's a very subtle effect that you can actively see getting like worse in each scene he appears in. Like props to their continuity and their makeup department because I think
Yeah.
it's a very cool effect. And while we're on the subject of Damodar, like his actor is doing a really good job.
This is also where I noted for the first time, I very genuinely, I think Damodar is the best actor in the movie as far as giving the most realistic and grounded
Yeah.
performance.
Damodar is played by Bruce Payne, just to give him his laurels.
Give
For
him
this
some
role.
flowers for this. Yeah. And spoiler alert for the next two movies in the Dungeons and Dragons trilogy, because they did get two more. He is the only returning actor.
I have to make a correction for you.
Oh, really? Okay.
One movie. He only appears in the sequel.
Only appears
The direct
in the
sequel to this. Which is a... We will talk about eventually on this podcast. We're gonna do the whole trilogy and... Or quadrilogy if you want to count Honor Among Thieves.
Yeah.
Getting back into the summary of the movie now. We get... one of my favorite little scenes, the tavern scene. And this is one of my favorite scenes because there is some really fun costume work in this scene, specifically the orcs, which
Yes.
are fan-fucking-tastic. I love the way they look. They almost look like Krogans from Mass Effect. They've got like this cool armor that kind of comes up in like a hood around them while they're like kind of hunched over.
They are great little guys. I never thought that I would look at an orc and say, that's a great little guy. These orcs are great little guys. They're all hunched
Yeah.
over and clomping around. They're great. I wish an orc had been
Yeah.
the main character. From a practical perspective, I know why they didn't do that, but also I would have loved to follow an orc around rather than
Yeah.
these three idiots.
Yeah. Actually, talking about that, interestingly enough, Snails was originally conceived as a half-orc, but they didn't want to do that. I think that idea eventually, like, got shot down.
Interesting.
Yeah. I digress. We're getting off track. Tavern scene. Elwood is eating... Yeah, Elwood's eating chicken in a really gross way.
It's awful.
Yeah. And Marina is very casually racist to him because Elwood is trying to justify the fact that he's in this movie. He's like, oh, if we get this rod for the Empress, she'll award us with heaps of gold. And Marina's like, can't you rise above being a dwarf for 1 second?
Yeah, Marina sucks.
Marina kind of sucks. She's also very classist to Ridley and Snails, who point out that the system is kind of unfair and why would they fight to preserve it. And she calls them, I think, illiterate because of that.
Yeah. Specifically, her argument when they say, at least there's honor among thieves versus in your people who backstab each other constantly. And she refers to that argument as illiterate dribble.
Yeah.
When meanwhile the plot is proving them correct, at least at
Yes.
this moment.
Yeah, at least in this moment, and also egg on her face because she tries to decipher the scroll and she can't, but Ridley recognizes the runes as some shit his dad used to use for, like, some kind of security spell. I think it's implied he was, like, a merchant or something.
A merchant, I think it might even have been a blacksmith because I think he specifically says that they're blueprints that he put this on. It's
Yeah, well,
it doesn't it doesn't
some kind of
matter.
craftsman or artisan.
Yes.
But yeah, it doesn't matter because what does matter is Ridley recognizes the runes and he's able to like read them and mimic them, and he gets turned into smoke and gets sucked into the scroll dimension,
Yes.
which Marina immediately imitates and follows him in there. Snails and Elwood do not, because one, Snails is untalented
And a
in
buffoon.
magic and a buffoon,
Yeah.
and Elwood doesn't do anything in this movie.
He eats and tells stories of his past conquests in
Yeah,
such a way that it's the
he,
least interesting thing you've ever heard. It's fascinating
I
to
don't
watch.
know. I think his performance in it is fun. The way he's talking about this is very funny. He talks about like, "Oh, I'm on my back." And I'm like, "Oh, there's nothing to lose." So I grab the spear in my teeth and I start chewing, which is very fun imagery in my opinion. I As much
Sure.
shit as I'm giving Elwood, he is at the very least a funny character when he gets to be one.
Yeah. Speaking of funny characters, or not very funny characters, actually, because she's kind of no fun at all. Hey, it's a mysterious elf lady in the worst armor you've ever seen.
Oh,
She's in
yeah.
the bar now.
Yeah, this is Norda, the tracker that was mentioned earlier, and her armor fucking sucks, and I hate it.
It's so bad.
Yeah, it is a breastplate, emphasis on breast. It is, like, conical around the chest and, like, sculpted to have, like, a flat stomach with a belly button in it, and it just looks terrible.
It's
The
awful.
actress is doing great as this character. In interviews, she talks about wanting to play this kind of like primal and like wild elfish aspect to her. And you can
Yeah.
kind of see it in her gaze. She kind of has this very intense, like, look in her eyes the whole time. She does a good job with it. The armor sucks, though. I'm sorry. You
Yeah.
can't convince me otherwise.
She does well in this movie. I think her character is super boring, but she is giving it her whole ass. Also, this actress is also the Queen mom in the Twitches movies. If you have seen those, I was delighted when I realized this.
Yeah, she shows up and Snails is immediately smitten. He goes to hit on her, but uh-oh, he does not realize that she is a cop and she is here to fucking arrest him. But as Snails is going to, flirt with her, much to Elwood's disapproval, Elwood does not like elves because they have no meat on their bones and suggests that Snails gets a 250-pound dwarf woman with chin hair you can grab onto.
And he is based for that opinion.
Yeah, he's based for that.
But none of that matters anyway, because at this moment, who comes in? Uh-oh, it's Blue Lipstick Man. Damodar is here.
Damodar comes in, and you know what? Elwood does actually do something in this scene. He starts a bar fight, which disrupts the police raid that's going on, and they are able to slip out. So you know what? Apologies to Elwood, you do exactly one thing in this movie. It's something that anyone could have done, but you did it. Anyways, they get away, and Snails opens up the scroll and comedically says, like, the magic words wrong as he's trying to get Ridley out of it. Ridley and Marina come out on their own, and they describe something that would have been very interesting to see. Apparently, there was some kind of wraith in the scroll dimension who told them that the staff caused a big fuck-ass war in the past that they never really elaborate on. And Ridley reveals to Snails that he was convinced to help find the Rod of Savril after all, which Snails
Uh,
is incredulous about.
he's pissed, once again proving Ridley is a bad friend. I also noted down at this point, because we've passed the point where we've gone into the scroll, which Hey, fun fact, we're never going to talk about the stupid scroll again, so I'm going to get all my complaints about it out here.
Of course.
One, like you said, why didn't we go into the scroll world? That would have been cool to see. The answer is probably money. They didn't have the money or time for it. Two, what does it say about Ridley that his dad knew spells and could do spells? Is that to imply that there's magic within the commoners,
Yeah.
actually, that they're not so different after all? Is this just a thing for Ridley and his family? Are they some kind of different fantasy race that they have magic involved in it? Three, it doesn't fucking matter anyway. We never talk about this ever again. This is the last we hear of the scroll or even of Ridley doing magic. Like that's it. This is all that we get of it.
Yeah. So I kind of had a similar thought regarding Ridley, which was, why can Ridley do this? And to satisfy my curiosity, I poured back into the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons manual.
Of course.
So the question I had was like, what fucking class is Ridley? Because, you know, Snails is definitely a thief. Elwood is some kind of fighter or barbarian. Marina, as we've established before, is a mage. So Ridley, the best thing I could determine is Ridley is a thief, and apparently thieves can use scrolls once they hit 10th level. So the best explanation I can come with within the rules of D&D, which according to the people who worked on this movie, they were trying to generally follow. That's what Ridley is, a level 10, a 10th level thief. But as you said, for narrative purposes, it does not matter because this ability never comes up again.
It's yeah. This is also kind of, I'll go back to what I said at the start about this being bad fantasy writing. There is a difference between writing for a tabletop RPG and writing for a movie, and this movie
Yes.
does not distinguish between those things. It
Yes.
is a shame if you put it into the perspective of, I am somebody who wants to watch a movie. Regardless of whether or not I know D&D, I want to watch a front to back good movie. That this does not work in that regard.
Yeah.
It's
And
kind of a shame.
most people at the time did agree with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ridley and Marina have come out of the scroll, and Ridley says, in order to get to the temple that has the Rod of Savril in it, they need to first go to Xylus, the Thieves Guildmaster from Antius City, to get something called the Dragon's Eye, which is a big ass ruby that is used to unlock the temple. Snails is a coward, but easily swayed, as established earlier. Ridley is very manipulative to his friend. He's like, oh, I understand if you don't want to go. And immediately Snails has, like, abandonment issues and is quickly talked into stealing the ruby. Ridley, in full earshot of Marina, tells Snails that the plan is to double-cross Marina to just steal the ruby and pawn it off once they have it. It's very clear that he is not going to do this, that he is blatantly lying to Snails.
Also, Elwood is here and he's like, why should I come along, as if they asked him? And Ridley and
Well,
Snails are like,
no,
Marina's
no.
gonna pay. Oh.
He does not say, why should I come along? He says he's coming because he doesn't see what other choice he has. Which is weird because he does not have to be here. I guess his reasoning is the cops are after him now too because he's been seen with them, but we never really get that as far as I can tell. And his only question is who's gonna pay him? To which they all point at Marina. Marina says they'll discuss this later, and we get a very funny shot that of Elwood's face getting zoomed in on as he squints directly at the camera, shakes his head, and goes, "That's a terrible way to do business."
He just goes along with it anyway. It is such a nonsensical shot. I think it's very funny, but not for the reasons that the people who made this movie think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because it's weird that they thought that this was funny in a way that was like actually haha funny versus this doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would you put this in your movie funny?
Yeah. And as we pan away from this close-up shot of Elwood, we see in the trees that Norda is watching them and tracking them down. And we cut now to a really fun city market scene. We get like a big matte painting of this city that's built off of these big, like, stacked rocks and like bridges suspending them over like a huge chasm. It's very, if nothing else, I think, and I mentioned this already, the like set designs and the matte paintings and all that, the production that went into this, I think is very fun. I think it's good fantasy set dressing that is hampered by the bad fantasy writing.
It is evocative of fantasy movies from like the 60s and 70s and
Yeah.
80s where it was all they had no choice but to do everything practically, and it looks like that, and that is doing a lot of heavy lifting for how much fun it is to watch this movie.
Yeah. So we get to this market scene. There are some really fun costumes here, and we finally see the purple guy we mentioned earlier at the very start of this episode, who looks wild. He looks like a Star Trek alien almost. He's got this all this purple makeup and prosthetics on his face. He's got this huge like dorsal fin. He looks like what's that dinosaur? Like a Parasaurolosis. It's just a big like dorsal fin on his forehead. He is bright purple. Like there's purple stripes on his forehead, and smack dab in the middle of his forehead is an eyeball that's actually like articulate. It's got animatronics in it. It like blinks as he is standing there like looking at the characters who bump into him and harass him, and he has like a really funny voice actually. It's like it is not a voice that like fits his character in my opinion. It's kind of lilting almost.
Yeah, he's kind of doing like a this voice, and then he's also like sticking his tongue
like
out a lot.
It's like a very hissing lisp.
It's almost as if he's supposed to be a snake man, but he's not a snake man.
He is not. Ridley refers to him as a, quote, three-eyed hyphen bastard. So it's not clear to me if hyphen is, like, the race of what he is, or if Ridley was doing, like, a comedic, oh, I'm saying the hyphen out loud.
Yeah. Or if he is, like, multiple races, and Ridley is unsure which, and is just throwing that out there.
Regardless, I cannot find anything of what this guy is. He is just, as you pointed out, he is a creature, which is what the subtitles designate him as.
That's all the subtitles have him as.
Yeah, but, it's great. As they're walking through this market, Snails is comedically stealing basically everything that is not nailed down, and every time like the scene changes, we see him just have more and more stuff like piled on his person. At one point he steals a dead cat from a basket and is like stroking it in like the next scene.
It's a goofy little moment for them, and I like this movie when it's just doing little gags like
it's fun. So they follow the purple guy back to the Thieves Guild because they see him pickpocketing stuff. And they tell Elwood to wait outside so he doesn't have to do anything.
Well, before that, they approach him directly.
Yeah.
And are like, let us inside. And the creature is like, Zite, if you know what's best for you, you will not seek out silent. Like something along those lines.
He basically tells them to fuck off because they're outsiders.
And then immediately Snails and Ridley go to Marina and Elwood and are like, okay, so we're just going to sneak in and follow him.
Yeah.
Why the fuck would you announce yourself to these guys? Now they know to look for you.
Yeah. I guess the idea was like, oh, we'll bump into him and then he'll go tell Xylus that outsiders are in the city so we can follow him when he goes to like alert the guildmaster of our presence. But I think that's very poorly communicated.
These are bad thief tactics. If you're thieves, just go inside. Just sneak in.
as pointed out, they don't do a very good job sneaking in because they are caught immediately once they get into the guild by the three-eyed hyphen bastard again, and a guy who looks like a watermelon. There is a guy
Yes.
who's like entirely done up in face paint that is just like watermelon stripes. It's really
It's
funny.
great. It's great.
Yeah, but they're in the guild hall and the three-eyed hyphen bastard goes, "Take him away!" in his lilting serpent voice. And they take them away to Xylus. Snails goes somewhere else, but Ridley and Marina get taken to Xylus, the guildmaster, who is a cunty little bald man.
Hunty little Baldman. They do this thing with him where when Ridley and Marina are first talking to him and trying to sell their case, he's turned away from the camera and then he turns around and is like, ah, yes, and kind of does a face reveal thing.
Yeah.
And I know that the actor who plays this guy
Yeah.
does have some cred
So,
in England, in English TV specifically.
yeah, this is Richard O'Brien, who is, I think, at the time was most known for his role as Riff Raff in the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, which is not saying a lot considering how culty that movie is. But
Yeah.
even in the context of the film, when it's like they're trying to do a reveal, like they think they got us, like that we're gonna think that this guy, or like we've seen this guy before or something. And that's when I came up with the theory. This
Oh,
is a
yeah.
white bald man. Did
Oh,
they did they think that we thought that this was going to secretly be Damodar? And then on top of that, is the reason that Damodar has his cunty blue lipstick on because this movie thinks that we, the audience, cannot tell two white bald men apart? Is that the entire reason? That's my
I
theory.
I think you might be onto something because they do look, in my opinion, pretty similar.
And I don't think that at all after watching this movie twice. Like, Xylus is this little effeminate,
Yeah.
wincing fairy man, and Damodar is like a sexy man's man. I also this was also around the point when Damodar comes back the next time. I will repeat this. Damodar can fucking get it. Um, like very actually, I think this actor is genuinely very attractive. And no one else is gonna see that but me because all of you are racist against bald people. But that is my whole thing. Where that is my theory that I've come up with as to why Damodar has the slutty blue lipstick on. They think that we're gonna confuse him with this guy, and they look nothing alike. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but as you said, Xylus is a very very gay kind of character. He's definitely playing up the sort of theatrical effeminate affectation. He hits
He's
Marina on the
lisping.
butt.
Yeah,
And
that's
Marina,
weird.
yeah, he's not a good guy. They very quickly establish is he's kind of like a weaselly, opulent man. Marina has no idea how to fucking negotiate in this scene because she immediately tries to appeal to his patriotism to convince him to give her the ruby. She's like, she starts with like, oh, the fate of the Empire of Izmir is at stake before Ridley immediately like claps a hand over her mouth and is like, hey, we heard you have a big ass ruby and we would like to have it.
Yeah.
Ridley basically just straight up asks for it. He basically says, oh, I'm Union, is what he says to Xylus. He says, I'm part of the Thieves Guild in good standing at Sumdal. I would like to try to have your ruby. And
Yeah.
Xylus, I guess, is taken by Ridley. He's like, oh, yeah, I like your gumption, kid. And he basically says, okay, yeah, I'll let you try for the ruby. And then he puts him in a Legends of the Hidden Temple ass labyrinth.
It is so delightful when he comes up to this labyrinth because it's very clear that they built it internally, but not with it in mind to get a shot of the outside of it. So you
Yeah.
have the actor delightfully approaching this very obvious green screen image where, like, the gate, like, fucking. It looks like when it rises, it looks like one of those text-based adventure games where, like, they have just that one stock image where one thing moves on it, where you're
Yeah.
doing your little typing thing at the bottom. And then it immediately cuts to a shot of him in the maze where you can tell that the facade of it is not what we just saw. It's great.
Yeah. So this maze was built entirely practically. It's all practical. It was all a soundstage set. And it's just like this big labyrinth of like traps. It's a proper dungeon. It's our first proper dungeon in this movie of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And above the labyrinth are people making bets.
I made a note that because this maze is practical and just the general vibe that they have of like all the people like standing over, placing bets on his life, the fact that, as you mentioned when we were watching this thing, the actor did do pretty much all of his stunts practically in this.
Yes, most of the actors did do all their stunts. They did have stunt doubles who did the very, very dangerous things. But in an interview with Ridley's actor, he basically said, yeah, I did basically all of my stunts. Elwood did 93% of his stunts. That was like the exact number he gave.
Lovely.
They all had to do the sewer slide. But yeah, and Ridley also said, Ridley's actor, that is, said, like, there were injuries every day.
Oof.
It was more, but no, he was very excited to do the stunts. He didn't seem upset at the fact that there were injuries every day because he said, oh, it's like very minor injuries. Like everyone would get a scrape and bruise. The worst thing that happened was a broken pinky.
Okay.
Yeah, so they did most of their stunts. It was, difficult work, he said, but something he really took to was the sword fighting, which I don't think I've mentioned to this point. Those are all real swords they're using. They are not using they're obviously like the edges are dull and shit, but they are not using prop swords. They are using real ass metal swords.
Which I think does contribute to what I will talk about later, which is that the choreography in this is kind of clunky. The fight choreography.
Yeah.
We'll get to that because I want to finish up the point that I was making, which I appreciate you jumping in on. This is the first time in the movie that there is a sense of danger, in my opinion. Like, just up until this point, it's like, oh, a man is dead, but like the main characters weren't in any danger.
Yeah.
This is the first time that there's like this palpable sense of, oh, this is an adventure movie with stakes, you know?
Yeah.
And that is something that I appreciate this scene for. The place where I will knock it is, and this is something that I noticed throughout the rest of the movie, but the lighting in this movie is bad. It is, they did not know how to light a movie. They are trying very hard. They've got their fun torchlight, etc., etc. They have no idea what they're doing. It's either underlit, like they just have the torches, and so, like, I notice it specifically with Ridley. He comes up, I think, to the end part of the maze when he's just about to get the ruby, and it's entirely in shadows, and it looks so bad, and you can't tell what face he's making. Or they are overcompensating for the fact that they're trying to use natural lighting by having, like, big stage lights above so you can actually see shit, and so it just washes everything out. It is... It's kind of impressive that the movie looks as bad as it does. And it's entirely because of the lighting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a scene, like, very close that happens after this whole maze sequence where Ridley runs out, and I guess it's nighttime because everything is, like, color-graded blue as fuck. It is like Terminator. It is, like, bluer than Terminator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he gets into this maze, and it starts with, very standard booby trap affairs, like spikes coming up from the floor, swinging axes that he jumps onto and swings, and then he gets into the next section, which is this eyeball hallway with all these stones that have like eyes carved onto them, and if you step on the wrong tile, they all shoot out bursts of flame. And again, this is all done practically. These are real, like, bursts of flame. And I think this sequence I pointed out while we were watching is a very interesting relic of how adversarial D&D-D and D and D originally was. Like, nowadays with 5th edition, there's a much more like directly endorsed play style of, oh, everyone is trying to collaboratively tell a story. But, back in early D&D days, it was much more adversarial. It is like the dungeon master is trying to kill you. It's very hostile. And this reminded me specifically of Tomb of Horrors, which was something Gary Gygax developed for his friends because he felt that because they had become so familiar with the game, they needed to be taken down a peg. And
Oh.
this hallway of traps reminds me of this. You can almost see the DM adding more bullshit to the traps in real time because Ridley pokes at the tiles with his sword to determine what color eyeball are safe to step on. It's like the red eyes are safe. So as he starts moving through, like the instant he figures this out, the wall behind him starts going forward, like towards him. So he is being pushed forward through this hallway, so he has to move much quicker. And as he's moving quickly, the tiles he's about to step on start flipping over into yellow eyes, which are not safe, and he's almost falling over and everything. And like I said, you can almost hear the DM being like, in real time. This is incredibly Tomb of Horrors, which is,
Yeah.
it very much feels like that, which I think is really fascinating, especially when we eventually get around to the modern D&D movie, which is based on 5th edition, and
Yeah.
how different it feels.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ridley is making his way through this hallway, and like all of the safe tiles flip over at once, and he has to make a final desperate leap through the door, which has also started to close in front of him. Just very comical upping of the stakes through this one trap hallway. But he jumps through, barely gets singed by the flames, and he lands into what, in my honest opinion, it looks like a saw trap.
It does.
Yeah,
This is
he lands in this room where immediately a skeletal hand gripping an hourglass flips over to start a timer. A spiked ceiling starts descending on him, and this mechanism of like auger drills and like gnashing metal plates and buzz saws that are just kind of clanging and meshing together over and over, like in front of this keyhole. Like it's brutal. It's like a meat grinder he has to stick his hand into to pick this lock, and he like tries to jam his sword in it. It bounces off, and this is again where I say, oh, this is very Tomb of Horrors, where the solution to this trap is to smash the hourglass timer, which causes the trap to stop. It's nonsensical, it's overly specific, and it is very much this was designed to like kill the player unless they are incredibly like metagaming the shit out of things. And I think it's very fun. I like this sequence a lot for that specific reason.
This might be my favorite sequence in the movie. Like, so genuinely. I think this part of the movie is unequivocally good. It's good. I liked it.
It's inarguably good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, Ridley breaks into the vault and he walks in, and you see, awashed in red, this big-ass ruby on this pedestal. And then it cuts to him outside, everyone's celebrating. Xylus is like giving him a pat on the back, and then Xylus says, yes, I always knew that the person who could get through that maze would be the one to pick that lock, implying that he couldn't even get into that vault himself. It was there before he was, and he built the maze around it to trick some rube into breaking into it, because he immediately tells Ridley, yeah, okay, now give me the ruby. I'm not letting you keep it.
When Xylus says, give me the ruby, Ridley says, but what about honor among thieves? And Xylus laughs him off, which is calling back to his thing with Marina, where he said, we're better than you because we have morals and you don't, basically.
Yeah.
And as much as it is an eye roll for me, because it has now turned into that classic, oh, the thief and the aristocrat are at odds, and they discover that both of them are a little bit wrong. maybe let's not point to an underclass and say, hey, you're wrong for sticking together and banding up and thinking that those guys are a bunch of assholes.
Yeah.
Uh,
But
but
yes.
alas, we do have kind of the conclusion of that part of the arc where Ridley goes, huh, maybe I was wrong about how cool we
Yeah.
all are, you know?
Xylus scoffing at honor among thieves and basically saying, "Do you think I would be as successful as I am if I gave a shit about honor?"
Correct. But then that doesn't matter anymore because
Yeah.
who's coming through the front door?
Yeah, it's
Oh, it's our
Damodar.
boy. It's
It's
Damodar, it's our
Damodar, and
boy.
it's time for Baldy versus Baldy.
Baldy versus
Yeah.
Baldy.
Damodar comes in, kicks down the door basically, shoots a guy, and there's this very fun moment for Damodar's actor where Xylus threatens Damodar and says, I'll show you true pain for doing this, for breaking in and disrupting my guild." And Damodar looks at him, and you can see him like a very subtle like twitch in his own neck. He like kind of straightens and then says, "You must be joking."
Yeah.
And you can see, as we talked about, like his ears are even redder and the veins are slowly creeping up around him.
It's again, I have to give praise to this actor. He does very well in this movie, and also praise to the makeup team dash the person who made that decision to have those veins creep in. This is again an unequivocally good part of the movie. Also, on a less serious note, this is the part in my notes where I have these two men should kiss,
Yes.
which will
I
be a running theme in the podcast. I say this about a lot of movies. These are the two men in this movie that I think should kiss.
They don't kiss, however. They immediately come to blows. Like the Crimson Brigade rushes in. The Thieves Guild jumps down from the rafters to attack them. It's a big fight. Snails immediately hides behind the bar in the guild hall. Ridley almost stops the fight by threatening to like burn the scroll to be let out. But, you know, the Thieves Guild disrupt that. He loses grip on the scroll. It rolls around and Marina goes for it, but unfortunately, she gets nabbed by Damodar.
Well, we have to talk about the way that
Yeah.
she gets nabbed, Heather, because
Go
she's
ahead.
crawling on the ground trying to get to the scroll. She puts her hand on the scroll, and we comedically see a boot step into frame where it's clearly supposed to be that he's stepping on the scroll to kind of trap it
Yeah.
and make sure she doesn't take it, but his foot like distinctly lands next to the scroll rather than on it.
It is very clearly not on the scroll at all.
It's so funny. And it is Damodar, and he is here to take burrito.
I guess they didn't want to damage the prop.
And maybe, like, you know, they had to do multiple takes of it. This is, like, a crowded scene. There's a lot of stuff that can get messed up. But it is very funny to watch that boot, like, come down gently next to the scroll as opposed to on top of it. It's great.
Yeah. But I guess Marina is out of spell slots because she does basically nothing to try to get away from Damodar.
Correct. This is her damsel in distress moment.
Yeah, and this is where Ridley chases Damodar out into the night, question mark? Into the blue.
Into the
and
blue.
He's shouting, "Oh, Marina! Marina, where'd you go? Ah!" And we cut to them in the woods. Ridley wants to go rescue Marina. Snail says, "Fuck that. We have the ruby. Why would we do that?" And that question is answered quickly by Norda finally catching up to the party and having them at crossbow bolt point.
And this is the point in my notes where I wrote down that Snails' actor would have been a great Shaggy.
Yeah, he does kind of have that Shaggy vibe.
Well and true. Like, I love me some Matthew Lillard. Whoever this guy is, get him in the next Scooby-Doo movie. Shaggy all grown up.
Yeah. Hang on. Let's just credit these actors real quick because we've been mentioning them but not using their names. And you know what? They deserve props. They did the work in this.
They did the work in this.
We have so Snails is being played by Marlon Wayans,
Thank you,
and
Marlon Wayne.
Ridley was being played by Justin Whalen, and
Thank you, Justin
Marina is
Whalen.
being played by Zoe McClellan.
Cool. Thank you, Zoe McClellan.
Elwood is played by Lee Arenberg, and
Thank
Norda
you,
is
Lee
played
Armstrong.
by Kristen Wilson.
Thank you, Kristen Wilson. Thank you to all of you for this movie that you were in. I wish it were a better movie, but you did your part in it.
They did their best,
They did their best.
and they had so much fun with it. But yeah, Norda basically calls the Empress on a cell phone. She flips open this device and is projected through a magic mirror to the Empress, where Ridley has filled Norda in on Damodar's bullshit. She calls the Empress and is like, hey, Damodar's also looking for the rod for Profian. And the Empress really wants that rod, so she tells Norda to go after Damodar, and Norda decides to bring the party with her because she's still not trusting of them or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we cut now to Damodar interrogating Marina about the contents of the scroll and the whereabouts of the temple. He
Poor
tries to,
Marina.
yeah,
She
poor Marina.
They did a weird dirtying up of her.
Yeah,
Cause
she's
it's just her face that has dirt on it now. Her hair is still smooth and sleek. She's got on lip gloss.
yeah,
Her eyebrows are very cleanly done. It's just that she's all smudged. It's very funny, honestly.
it's very funny, yeah. And Damodar tries to play that he's ambivalent to Profian's overall plan and is being coerced into it. Damodar's like, no, no, it's Profian that wants to betray her. Please help me. If I don't get this for him, I'll die. And he he does a really good job of like acting in pain. The
Yeah.
actor, not Damodar, because he is in pain, and you can tell. He like pulls down the collar of his armor, and he's like barely choking out the words, like "Look at me," as you see like the bulges of these worms writhing under his skin and against his skull. And
It's a great effect,
yeah,
actually.
Marina tearfully replies that she can't help him, and Damodar very suddenly grabs her by the face, and the brain worms shoot out of his ears and into her.
It makes me feel some type of way when he does this. I don't like it one bit, but I also find it very comedic.
Yeah,
It's also one of those things where you can tell that the actors are just like acting against something that isn't there. That is
yeah,
very apparent that the mind flares are not there. These are just two people making faces at each other in a room. It's great.
yeah. And yeah, he is looking much rougher now. But he's able to use them to his advantage because he does get the information out of Marina. He learns about the scroll, he learns that the dragon's eye is a key, and he kind of now is privy to what they're planning with the rod. We cut back to our party, who are riding towards the castle Marina is being held captive at. Elwood is very displeased about this because apparently, and this is what he says, don't you know that dwarves are terrified of horses? And he also says a lot of dwarves are scared to hide or scared to share their true feelings, but I'm not. And all I can say to that is, Elwood, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like the movie realized they forgot to establish literally anything about Elwood as a character, and they are trying to give him depth and dimension. But we are like halfway into the movie at this point. It's a little late.
It's a little too.
Norda is doing ranger shit with like her tracking skills, and I guess she's also a party member now. Snails is still trying to hit on her. He offers to take an aging potion because he's like, "Oh, well, I might be a little young for you." He is 23 and Norda reveals that she is in fact 234. This puts Snails off a little bit.
Well, just a little bit though. He's still willing to do it.
He's still willing to do it, maybe. But yeah, it's time to sneak into the castle. But not
Yeah.
Elwood or Norda. They're staying outside.
Specifically because Norda like puts her hand on Elwood's shoulder and is like, this is not for us. This is for
Yeah.
them." Which
Yeah, Elwood literally asks why he can't go in. He wants to do something in the movie, but Norda immediately shuts that shit down and is like, it's not our destiny to go in there. And Elwood basically says that that's bullshit and doesn't make sense, which he's correct. They literally could not think of why those characters wouldn't go in the castle.
Yeah.
As they're going to the castle, we see beholders. We see one of the most, arguably the most iconic Dungeons and Dragons monster in, like, of all time. They're CG, but they're very fun. It's a very fun beholder design. They have, like, little things where when they go through doorways, all their eye stalks, like, retract into them and then come back out. It's cool.
They're basically big flying rocks with eyes, and it's great. It's delightful.
Snails and Ridley grapple up the castle wall and then exchange death flags. Ridley's like, hey, Snails, be careful. And Snails, as he's departing, goes, Ridley, you too. And I'm sorry, Snails, but it's the year 2000 and you're the comic relief character. It's gonna be you. This is your death flag.
Snails goes on what appears at first to be a fun little thief adventure because they've each been tasked with looking for the scroll. They split up, and Snails is the one who happens upon Damodar's room. He is comedically frightened by Damodar's armor, which looks nothing like him, but okay. And as it turns out, this thief adventure is not the fun time that he thinks it will be.
Yeah. But this is also the scene where he's, like, rummaging through Damodar's shit, and he finds, like, a bag of magic powder, to which he remarks, a little black magic, and this is the line I wrote fuck off in my notes about. Because come on. Yeah. And this is not me, like, the line is read very distinctly as, yes, that is the joke they're doing here.
Yeah. But don't worry, there's even more shit to come, because Snails spies the scroll on a thing, and it says out loud, oh, this is easy. Walks up to it and immediately starts sinking into the rug.
Yeah.
And says, man, I knew it was too easy. And it's like, yeah.
So this rug, what I have in my notes for this scene is Snails has oatmeal ruined forever because, and this is a byproduct of them having to film in the Czech Republic, the only thickening agent they could get their hands on in a timely and cheap fashion due to import laws of, like, whatever the new government was at the time was Quaker oats. So Snails walks onto this carpet, which is, like, it's a pit of Quaker oats that has been, like, painted over to look like a carpet, and it loses that immediately. Like, as soon as the surface is broken, it just becomes oatmeal, and Snails is, like, being forced to, like, drown almost in this oatmeal, sink down into it, struggle and everything, and they had to film multiple takes of this scene, and Snails' actor, Marlon Wayans, basically said that this ruined oatmeal for him forever. That after filming the scene, he was just unable to find oatmeal appetizing at all, which I get it.
That's very fair. I do love me some oatmeal, but I don't know how much I'd love it if I had to swim in it.
Yeah, but, you know, Damodar comes in, boots enter the frame, and Snails is caught, unfortunately. While this is happening, we cut to Ridley rescuing Marina, who he finds her in blankie mode in her cell. She's wrapped in a really surprisingly cozy-looking blanket.
It looks nice.
It's got patterns woven into it. It looks like a very heavy winter quilt. Like, I would love to have this, actually. I put this on my bed.
Well, Marina doesn't, because once Ridley rescues her, she leaves that shit behind.
Yeah, he drags Marina out, and they're escaping down the hallway, and we cut back to Snails, and Damodar yanks Snails out of the oatmeal and says, just like you thieves, always taking things that don't belong to you, which is the definition of a thief, Damodar. Do better.
Do better.
And Snails just starts to get his fucking ass kicked.
It's not fun to watch.
It's not. Like, it gets worse.
like watching the comedic relief character get actually beat up, like having like blood come out of his mouth and stuff. It's not
Yeah.
fun to watch. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of rough.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of rough, we get back to Ridley and Marina. So we're gonna have like this fight is kind of two things going on. It's Ridley and Marina's escape sequence and Snails getting the shit kicked out of him. And we're kind of cutting back and forth between that. We cut back to Ridley and he has to fight the big boy. Just this really tall, like, guy who's just like kind of having a hoot of a time just picking up Ridley and throwing him against walls over and over.
These boys are getting tossed.
They're getting their shit tossed around. Marina is still not casting any spells. She's hitting the guy with a torch instead. Ridley catches a glimpse of Snails being chased by Damodar, who is Michael Myers walking his ass into a corner. And Snails decides to make a triumphant stand against the villain. He turns and pulls out his weapon, and oh, Jesus fucking Christ, oh god damn, he is getting his shit absolutely fucking rocked. Somebody help.
Somebody help him.
Yeah.
Again, it is hard to watch.
Yeah.
This movie stops being fun for like a 5-minute sequence.
Damodar is doing some fucking Mortal Kombat shit to Snails right now. It is fucking brutal. It is just... No, Snails is not getting a single hit in. He is just getting his ass handed to him. And Snails... He has Snails by, like, the throat, kneeling on the ground, and he's about to, like, stab him with his, like, Wolverine claws. But Ridley interrupts him. He shouts, "Damodar, stop!" And Damodar turns and says, "Not your usual punctual self," which all of the one-liners they give Damodar are really fucking strange.
They're nonsensical.
Like, none of them make sense. Yeah, because what do you mean your usual punctual self? Damodar, you have only ever arrived at locations Ridley has already been at. Like, this line doesn't make sense.
It makes me wonder if it was maybe even just one or maybe a couple of scenes that they filmed in this movie of Damodar interacting a bit more extensively with these characters that got completely cut out.
Yeah.
Which would make sense because this movie is a slog to get through already.
This might actually be an artifact of the script rewrites, because apparently the final script was constructed from scenes from like 16 different drafts.
You never want to hear that.
Yeah, you don't want to hear that. It's not great. But yeah. Anyways, Snails sacrifices himself by tossing the scroll to Ridley, and Damodar stabs him and then throws him off the fucking castle wall. And this is another tonal shift of, like, this death is really brutal, but then seeing his body just kind of fly in slow motion. It's shot from below. You just see his body come over the wall and fall to the ground.
He's covered in oatmeal still.
He's still covered in oatmeal.
It's a really funny shot.
Yeah, and we get Ridley's Star Wars no moment where he falls to his knees and goes, "No!" And he immediately rushes Damodar, who kicks his fucking ass and stabs him through the shoulder, like pins him to the ground on his knees.
And this is when Marina finally finds her spell components again.
Yeah, she picks up the quote-unquote black magic powder that Snails had got from the earlier scene. I guess he dropped it while he was getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
Yeah, she throws a lightning bolt at Damodar and opens up another dimension door to get her and Ridley out of there.
Yep.
And now, back to politics.
Back to politics, folks.
Yeah. The Empress has remembered she's the Empress, and she tells the Wizard Parliament to fuck off. She's not giving them the staff.
The one note that I had from this scene was one of the little counselor guys is talking to her, and he's apparently named Asmath. And I noted, why does Asmath sound like a New York Italian restaurant owner? Because he does. And that's the only thing I took away from this. Yeah, because it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, the crux of this scene is the Empress promises she will burn this motherfucking shit down, to which Profian basically says, fuck it, let's do it. Why do we have a child empress anyway?
Yeah.
So now civil war is happening.
But that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Ridley is being healed by the elves or whatever.
Yeah, wood elves. Specifically, actually, and this is an actor I recognize, this is Tom Baker, who is probably most known for his role as Doctor Who, at least in the modern cultural zeitgeist. He's the one with the big scarf. I want to say that's the Fourth Doctor. But
You know
yeah,
better than I.
he's healing Ridley, and we get a really awkward lore dump about dragons and their life cycles and how it connects to magic. I think
And the
you
way
might have taken more notes on this than I did.
the way that the lore dump comes around is Tom Baker, who heals him, is like, I see you had a dream. And Ridley is like, yes, I had a dream about dragons. And then that's how the lore dump proceeds. Apparently, the magic that healed Ridley gave him magic dreams about dragons. But this is where we finally get the thing where gold dragons are good, red dragons are evil. It's a yin and yang situation where if one of them gets destroyed, everything falls out of balance. That's why you can't let Profian get the rod of Sarville or whatever. We're over an hour into the movie.
Yeah. That's not quite what he says. It's more
I know.
like... No, it's more... I did actually write this down. Was... Like, dragons' birth and death is what creates, like, the fabric of magic. They are kind of the source of magic, almost. Or at the very least, their life cycle is very heavily tied to it. And he tells him that the Rod of Savril is unnatural. And says, don't let the aristocrats do dragon war. It would be really bad and destroy the fabric of magic. Do not use the rod. So anyways, they're going to use the rod.
Anyway, they're going to get the rod.
Yeah.
It's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a, we're going to take it before they do situation.
Yeah.
I feel. But
which is a trope I hate, because it's like, okay, but if they weren't trying to take it, then the bad guys would also not gain access to it later when they finally do.
Whenever they try to explain their plot, it becomes evident that this is just a mishmash of fantasy plots, but not overly well explained or articulated or separated from their origins. Which is, I think, why I didn't fully grasp what they were talking about and kind of just came up with something else, because honestly, my explanation makes more sense, and there's a reason why it gets reused over and over again.
Well, yeah, your yin and yang thing is true as well. They just... It's just...
They added... They
it's
spiced
barely
it up.
there. It's
they,
like...
They spiced it up in a way that kind of doesn't make sense, and that's fine.
It's barely there, it being, like, what is happening in the movie. It's almost like they forgot that they're supposed to be establishing this later on. Which, in a way, makes it feel very authentic to D&D, because I know when I'm running campaigns, I'll have a moment where I'm like, oh, I forgot to give this important context to what you're doing. Oops.
Again, there is a difference to the way that you run tabletop RPGs
but
and the way that you write movies.
This was like a $40 million production. They didn't really have an excuse.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, Ridley and Marina kind of finally have their confronting their biases moment. Marina tries to examine her biases, but she insists that the system works actually because the Empress is good and is going to fix the problems. Eventually concluding on, Ridley, we're each one of the good ones of our respective casts. To which Ridley agrees, and we have the least satisfying romantic payoff of all time. They kiss... And the damn little pervert is watching. The weird imp that works for Profian has found them and is perving on them. So I guess Profian knows where they are. We don't really get his reaction to this scene. Yeah, anyways.
Instead, move on to a scene in the wilderness.
Yeah, and Marina is goth now.
She's goth now. She had to change clothes. Ridley is still in his bloodstained clothes, but Marina got to change her clothes.
Yeah, and Norda is now. Yeah, and Norda is still in her fucking awful armor, which I hate.
And we hate it.
Yeah, we finally arrive at the dungeon, which only Ridley can go into for some reason. There's like a wall of force around it. So he goes in, with a cool little lantern prop that I liked. It's like this weird like fold out case like that forms a paper lantern. I don't know. I like the prop. But he comes
It's a
to
cool prop.
a big scary door with a dragon carved into it, and he sticks the dragon's eye into it, and it opens up to the treasure room. There's all
I
kinds of glittering gold and artifacts spread throughout the
before
place. It's very Indiana Jones.
before we move on to this, I do want to make a note. There is one very cool and well lit shot in like the tunnel before you get
Oh
to
yeah,
the
the
thing where it's like it's either I think it's backlit and it's entirely green, so he's just in shadow.
yeah
I genuinely think it's the coolest shot in the movie, and that is emphasized by the fact that when he gets to the dragon door, it's the worst lighting in the movie. It's great.
yeah the green light. It's very John Carpenter's The Thing. Like the
Yes.
poster. That's what it looks like.
It's cool as hell.
But Ridley goes into the treasure room and he immediately like goes to scoop up some gold coins, but then decides not to steal, which is character growth, I guess.
I I was frustrated by this scene for a fantasy trope that they didn't employ, which is it's the whole thing that they do in Disney's Aladdin where it's like don't touch anything except for the thing that you're here for dash take only what you need. I think
Yeah.
that would have added tension to this scene that is entirely missing.
Yeah,
I
I'm not,
I was disappointed in that
I
personally.
I I'm gonna actually disagree with you here. I think
Okay.
I like from a character. Now this is like a crumb of characterization and character development, but I do like that Ridley chooses to, I guess, rise above being a thief in this moment where he has the opportunity to take this treasure and basically no one's going to stop him. But he instead, I guess, decides he wants to be better than that. And he has this little moment where he like holds the gold in his hand and he says and he apologizes to Snails in this little private moment and puts it back.
That's fair.
I think that's a nice moment for how little characterization we actually get to have in this movie. That
Yeah.
moment is nice at the very least, and I think because it's his choice to do it and not avoiding some curse, I think it's more impactful for whatever that's worth.
That's I think that's fair from a character perspective. And I will argue for the plot perspective that this is the second dungeon that we're really in, and it is a disappointing dungeon.
It's one
I
room.
fuck character development. I wanted him to be in danger in this. Get that shit out of
Yeah.
here.
And you know what? My discussion of character development kind of goes out the window in this following scene because he turns and he sees this skeleton hanging on the wall that's like draped in crimson robes and holding. I wrote in my notes a cheap ass Dollar Tree fucking staff. It
It
looks like a plastic piece of shit because it
it
is.
because it looks exactly like the other one as if they only had one prop for
Yeah,
this
but
movie and
red.
they filmed all of the scenes with one of them and then spray painted it a different color and used it in the rest of the scenes. I love this staff. It's terrible.
Yeah, it sucks, but Ridley reaches for it and the skeleton suddenly animates and he's like some kind of depowered lich or some kind of revenant, whatever. But he says, "Ah, who dares disturb my rest?" And Ridley says, "Oh, I'm here to save the Empire of Izmir. Who are you?" And the skeleton basically replies, "Dumbass, I'm Savril. Like, what the fuck do you think? I'm holding the rod."
Well played.
And I was punished for the crime of trying to control red dragons and put into this like never-ending purgatory, and I was sealed away down here. Are you such a man to control this rod? And Ridley says, "I guess I don't think there is such a man who exists, but let's find out." And he takes the rod and is almost immediately seduced by its power. Like frame one, as soon as he touches this, you see like his eyes change and he gets like evil horny, I would describe
I
it as.
I wrote in my notes, Ridley is so instantly captivated by another man's rod, it makes him look stupid. And I think that's
Yeah.
a perfect summation of what the fuck just happened.
Yeah, but he turns and he sees honestly a really impressive mural of red
It's
dragons
cool.
burning a city down, and I guess this kind of snaps him out of it and makes him think better of using the power. But we cut back to the city in this moment, and the Empress is doing fucking bombing runs with her dragons.
She's
She is
she's
she is
she's
flying them
doing
around and just shooting fireballs down at like the towers, and the mages are trying to shoot fireballs back. It's open war.
she's doing the blitz, and it's so immediately to the climax that it's like comedic.
Yeah,
It feels like a comedy cut.
yeah.
Like
We
that's the tone of this.
I will say we have some very fun practical explosions here to accompany the not so great CG. We have a guy get blown up through a window, which is very fun. And we zoom in on the Empress in another tower using her rod, and she very dramatically looks out over the destruction and says, "What have I done?"
Motherfucker, you summon dragons.
Yeah, you
Like
summoned
also dragon
dragons.
also dragons spotted, I guess. We're spotted more
Yeah,
of them. There's like 100 of these fuckers in the
they
sky.
are
It's great.
filling the sky, and they are fulfilling the Emperor's promise to burn this motherfucker down, because they
Yeah.
are.
Anyway,
Anyways, we cut back to the forest, and the most predictable thing ever happens, and Damodar steals the rod from Ridley the instant he comes out of the dungeon. And he's holding Marina hostage, and Ridley's like, "If I give you the rod, will you let them go?" And Damodar says, "You have my word," with the most "I'm going to betray you" ass three-quarter smirk of all time on his face.
he is stance the fuck up in this scene too. I wrote down what a cunt in my notes because I think that is perfectly describing what's happening right now.
Yeah,
Um,
he's very much having his like big bad guy chewing the scenery moment here.
it's great, and
He
he
like
deserves
he
it.
he like scratches like blood from Marina's shoulder and goes, "Oh, look, I've cut her. What a
It's great.
shame." Ridley gives him the staff and says, "So you'll let them go, right?" And he turns and goes, "I lied." And we come full circle now, where he finally gives the order to kill them slowly.
Yay! Planting and
He,
payoff.
yeah, comedy comes in threes. Let's go.
You did skip over something that I think is worth mentioning, which is that Ridley like tosses the staff to Damodar, and the shot of it is so janky that I'm wondering if because this thing is a piece of shit plastic that they should have filled up with sand, but I don't think they did. It doesn't look heavy enough. I think they might have CG'd him tossing the rod because the way that this thing goes through the air and then suddenly like the base of it like flips out and swoops down into Damodar's hand is so janky looking. I think they might have had to go back and do it as a digital effect because they couldn't do it for real because the staff is too much of a piece of shit. It's great.
Yeah, I would definitely have to rewatch that. That's really funny. But yeah,
Yeah. And
again, big fight happens. Marina gets tossed around and doesn't really get to do shit now that she's goth.
yeah. She's goth and a woman, so
Yeah.
why would she be able to do anything?
Yeah. And Damodar actually casts some kind of teleport spell here, which is interesting because he hasn't done magic up to this point. He might be using some kind of permanent teleport cast from a magic item because this leaves a portal that Ridley is able to chase him through to get to Prothean.
Although, hilariously, they do not appear in the same spot.
Yeah, he comes in
It's
like a
weird.
couple seconds behind him and somewhere else. Because
It's great.
Damodar comes through the portal and he hands the rod to Prothean, who, again, Jeremy Irons looks like he is about to fucking come when he is holding this thing. And very surprisingly, he actually keeps his word to Damodar and deworms him.
But
But,
but when the deworming quote unquote happens, the way it is the worms like come out of his ear, like they make a funny little dance outside of his ears, but then they go back into his ears and like the redness like drains from his skin. And I'm like, are we supposed to assume that it came out the other end? Did he shit his pants and the worms came out in there? Is that what
Oh
happened? Did he
no,
come? Did
ivermectin.
he come? Did he come? Is
He
that
re-
how the worms left his body?
he really was dewormed. That's how that usually works.
He pissed him out. It's
Oh no.
entertaining. Oh, also, this is something that I wrote in my notes. I did have the movie sped up at this point, and I was like at the end of my bottle of drink, which I hadn't eaten very much the day that I took these notes. So I was feeling it. And I can tell from my feelings right now, but also like the quality of the notes that I'm taking. I was enjoying the movie at this point, and I absolutely think it was
Yay.
because I had sped it up.
Yay.
I think hey, suggestion, watch this movie at 1.5 times speed. You will have a fun time.
Yeah. Anyways, Profian uses the staff to open up a portal and summon a bunch of red dragons. Meanwhile, the Empress is now riding one of her dragons and is personally laying the city to waste. I don't
She
like.
also
She's not
has
even shooting like the mage tower. She's just fucking shooting.
She's just shooting. She's also being attacked by the red dragons. She's also in a fantastic little like Joan of Arc armor veil.
Yeah, all of
It's
the
great.
Empress's outfits are very fun in this. So
They're
yeah, we get
they're
our
good.
we get our red dragon versus gold dragon CGI dogfight, and now we finally get Damodar versus Ridley, who finally finds his way through the portal and goes to fight Damodar hand to hand. Again, this is the Star Wars of fantasy. We kind of have a Ridley succumbing to the dark side moment or something, where he's getting angry and aggressive, and he eventually stabs Damodar. Or he cuts Damodar and does the "oh look, I've cut you" line again. Which is, he's like really hamming it up now. He's like, has like this evil grin on his face. He's like engaging in the bloodlust, but eventually he stabs Damodar and throws him off the tower, which looks real bad.
It
It's
looks real bad. It could be such a cool moment because it's like that thing where it's mirroring how snails died,
yeah.
but then we're in a CGI horrible little landscape at this point, and also, God, the acting is so hammy at this point. It's really funny.
It's really funny. And speaking of ham, we now get to confront Profian, who
Yo.
again, he is just fucking going crazy. He's making like Richard Nixon ass noises, like
It's I
let
love
the
Jeremy Irons in
blood
this.
rain from the sky.
And he's
Yeah,
got the rod of
he,
Sevril at this
yeah,
point, so
he is.
he's raising this awful little plastic staff, and you can tell that this thing
Yeah,
weighs maybe a singular
yeah.
pound. It's
I talked about him looking like a prosperity gospel preacher earlier, but he is absolutely doing like some fire and brimstone shit in his performance right now. It's
yes,
great. He's having so much fun. And he says to Ridley, like, he's like, "You dare try to take my destiny? I'll invent a new destiny, especially for you, full of pain, new kinds of pain, and new senses to feel it with." It's it's so it's so corny. The like lines they are giving these people is absurd. But yeah, anyway, Ridley tries to fight a level 20 archmage and gets his ass kicked. The other characters show up kind of out of nowhere. I guess someone else cast a portal spell up here. Marina knocks the staff from his hand, but immediately gets bitch smacked. Elwood tries to do something, and the movie punishes him for this because he gets bitch smacked. He doesn't even get a hit in.
no,
And Norda gets held with hold person and thrown, but now Ridley has the staff because Profian was distracted, and Profian turns to Ridley and laughs, and he's like, "Oh, you think you can actually use that?" And oh shit, Ridley can actually use it. We see the red dragon start to turn. Marina immediately is fully on board for Ridley to use the evil power. She's like, "Yo, use the evil power and destroy him."
Ridley's actor has so much fun acting possessed.
And he turns and goes, "No, I won't become you." Which again, extremely Star Wars. This is the Star Wars of fantasy. Did you know you wanted this to be the Star Wars of fantasy?
You know what, Heather? I would have loved it if this were more the Star Wars of fantasy in that any of this was set up, but you know what? Maybe
Yeah,
that's in the next movie.
it's not. But yeah,
Oh,
Ridley smashes the rod, and Profian is real mad about this. And suddenly the Empress is here. She's here, and she tells Profian that it's Jover. Profian declares that it's never Jover, and then summons like his fucking stand to grapple the Empress. Like a skeletal dragon appears behind him while he's chanting, and it like grabs the Empress by her arms and like wrestles her to the ground. But she's able to like raise her staff, and a gold dragon shows up and just fucking eats Profian one bite, and
this
then Swan dives off the tower.
I should note that like the sequence of like from the staff gets destroyed to Profium being gobbled by a dragon, it happens within the span of maybe a minute.
Yeah, it's so
It's
fast.
so fast.
This climax happens so quickly, it's steamrolled.
Yeah.
Speaking of things happening quickly, we then immediately like fade to a panning shot over the city and over the water as we hear in the background the Empress declares that classism is over.
It's done.
Yeah,
And
it's
then there's
over.
a cheer. There's a cheer.
Yeah, I guess everybody was cool with it, and also the carpet bombing, I guess. I feel like I'd be kind of pissed about the carpet bombing, but what do
Don't
I
worry about
know?
that.
Yeah.
What do you
so,
know?
Yeah, it's very funny. She's like, citizens of Izmir, I do declare that equality and prosperity is now for all citizens. It's just the most vague, like the problem is over shit ever. It's an anticlimax.
Yeah.
And we pan over to see our party standing over where Snails was buried, and he doesn't even get a proper grave. And I think we both wrote the exact phrase in our notes that all Snails gets is a long forgotten lonely cairn of stones. Yeah.
For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage.
Yeah, but yeah, just a stack of rocks.
With his name carved
with his
into
name
the top
carved
one.
on one of them.
That's
Ridley is gonna leave the ruby with Snails. I guess he went all the way back to the dungeon to get it. He's like, "Oh, Ridley, you finally got, or not Ridley, Snails, you finally got your big score."
Yeah. Also Ridley is goth now.
Yeah, Ridley is goth now, and he's being given a knighthood, so now he's part of the system. A victory, I guess, for his character. And now I'm gonna read verbatim what I have in my notes here, and then you can read verbatim what you have in your notes, I think.
Yeah.
Some kind of fucking wind shows up and erases Snail's name from the grave. The dragon's eye glows. Norda says, "Don't question your gift. Your friend awaits you." And they all turn into fucking glitter and fly away. The end. What the fuck?
Oh, hey, Heather. Is this a sequel? Is this what the sequel is going to be? Surely this is what the sequel is going to be.
You would think so.
Surely this is what the sequel is going to be. Is then they're going to go off and find Snails or whatever because they got turned into glitter and that's what they're going to go do. Surely that's the sequel. That's what the next movie is.
Surely this is just like when they had to rescue Han Solo from Carbonite in Star Wars, because this is the fantasy of Star Wars.
Surely.
Or sorry, the Star Wars of fantasy.
This is the fantasy of Star Wars.
The fantasy of Star Wars was the belief that this was going to be nearly as successful as Star Wars.
Well, in any case, we surely won't know until we watch the sequel whether or not these are the events that take. Except no, we totally know it's not.
Yeah,
that's not what happens. The end.
Yeah, the end. Would you like to read off what your final note on this movie was?
Oh yeah, because they were all touching hands, and so I wrote "touch hands" like it's the Girl Scout promise or whatever, and then a scream.
Yeah, you just wrote "ah" in very big letters.
For
just we're not gonna do this.
We're not gonna do it. We can't.
So that was Dungeons and Dragons 2000, and Hoofa Doofa, what a movie!
What a movie!
Yeah, would you like to know how this movie turned out when it finally got released?
It was a box office bomb, I'm sure.
Yeah, so the movie had a budget of, as I said, like 35 to 45 million dollars. Its final box office gross was 33.8 million, so they did not even break
Oh,
even with this movie. And
oh,
they had very high hopes for this film, that this would, revive fantasy as a genre, that this would be the foundation of fantasy movies, like going forward. This would be the Star Wars of fantasy. It wasn't.
and it
And
wasn't,
yeah,
and fantasy actually died, and we've never gotten a fantasy movie
no,
ever
see,
again.
that's the funny thing. This is what's very funny about this, is because, hey, guess what immediately followed up this movie in the fantasy genre? Harry
Is it
Potter
possibly?
and Lord
Oh,
of the fucking Rings.
I was gonna say Fellowship, but
Yeah,
Harry Potter instead of that is very
yeah,
funny.
no. So Harry Potter, which features like wizard society and a magic school, and Lord of the Rings, which is an actual fantasy trilogy on par with Star Wars and perhaps even more successful in terms of like accolades.
Yeah,
The yeah, it really is tragic almost, because a lot of these actors basically went nowhere. This was like a career dead end for a lot of a lot of the people involved. And as a it's funny because Lord of the Rings was in production while this movie was in production. Like, they knew about it, and their sentiment was like, "Oh, we have nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. We're not really borrowing from it at all. We hope it's successful because that would be good for the fantasy genre. That's what we're all trying to do." And it just to see them faceplant so hard, like right, just a year too early, before people like gave a shit about fantasy all of a sudden, it really makes you wonder what could have been.
yeah,
If they had a little more like proper talent involved in this, if they had better investment, if they had people who like were as passionate about it as they were, but also
yeah,
had the resources and skills.
yeah. It is nice to know though that their view of Lord of the Rings was not, oh yeah, we're gonna like kick their ass
Yeah,
and be
we're the
way
Lord of the
better than they
Rings
are.
killer.
But instead, like that very good and proper, in my opinion, view of whenever you hear that someone is coming out with something that is similar to you, going, oh, that's going to be a net good for the genre that we are working in. I
Yeah.
think that's a cool sentiment.
The I think I describe this movie as like fun a lot, but I think the other word I would use to talk about it is earnest. This is a very earnest
Yeah,
movie that is
for better or for
unashamed,
worse.
yeah, unashamed of what it is, and aspirational in what it is trying to be. But yeah, speaking of like the aftermath of this movie, I would like to revisit Courtney Solomon, because I found out something really funny when researching the trajectory of his career.
Oh,
So, he only ever directed two more films after this one. An American Haunting in 2005, which he also wrote and produced. It was a critical flop, but at least was financially successful in that it
okay.
made back twice its budget.
Okay.
So, like, moderately successful. Not like a blowout, but, you know.
Yeah.
And then Getaway in 2013, which he also produced but did not write. And this was not a financial or critical success. It was, according to Variety, one of the biggest box office bombs of 2013.
Ooh.
Yeah, it did not make back its budget. But so those were the only two films he, directed and wrote, but he did produce many more films in his still ongoing career. He's still working on stuff. And some of these films includes the sequel. He produced the sequel to Dungeons and Dragons 2000.
Okay.
Some horror movies like the Strangers series,
Okay.
and fucking After, the One Direction fanfic movie.
Oh my god.
He got the rights to produce that in 2018.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Wait. Wait.
Yeah, this is what I was excited to tell you specifically about, Diana. I discovered this as soon as I started research, and I was like ecstatic. I was like, oh my god, that's incredible.
As a note, I've only seen all the way through the first After movie. I don't recommend that one.
Yeah.
But I've seen enough of the rest of the series that I 110% recommend those, because the first movie got produced with like a TV-14 PG-13 rating. The rest of them are R-rated movies.
Oh my god.
So you not only have the fuck word being thrown around, they have on-screen sex, and it's some of the worst that you will ever witness. I highly recommend them.
But yeah, that's kind of the post-mortem of what happened with Dungeons and Dragons 2000. And for all the shit we gave this movie, I am still glad it exists, and I wish better for it. I wish circumstances were different around it, and I wish it got to achieve its ambitions.
And you know what? For all the flack that I specifically gave it, it's not the worst movie ever made. It is, in a lot of ways, not for me personally, but if it interests you in any way, if you sat here and you're like, man, that kind of sounds like a fun time to watch with, like, my D&D group, or, like, to sit down and watch with my friends, or, like, as, like, a fun date night with some nerdy person I met on Bumble or whatever, I think this is a very serviceable movie for those exact circumstances.
I definitely agree. This is absolutely a get shit-faced with your D&D buddies and watch this on like a Saturday night. You will have a fun time.
You'll have a blast.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of D&D friends, so I put a pin in this earlier when I was talking about, the actual class and level of these characters. The actual mechanical aspects of this. And during my research, like, very last minute as I was looking up some things, I discovered something that I am very excited about.
Okay.
Included in the DVD extras of this movie was a supplementary fast play adventure PDF called The Sewers of Sumdal, featuring simplified character sheets and descriptions for each of the members of the party.
Oh my god.
And I am going to read out the descriptions they include of these characters, because I was able to find the first 4 pages of this PDF. I have not been able to track down the whole thing, but I think it would be very fun at some point in the future to do an actual playthrough of this adventure. I am willing to go back and learn Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition to do this.
And I am willing to find and purchase a copy of this on DVD so that we have, like, all of the official shit that came with it.
Yeah, I was so delighted to see this, but yeah. Anyways, let's start with Ridley, a human rogue. Ridley is he is a rogue. So Ridley is a skilled fighter and thief. He is ambitious, daring, and a bit cocky. He prefers thinking up clever tricks to fighting, but when the chips are down, he can swing a sword with the best of them. Gotcha. And now we get to Marina, who is a human wizard. Marina discovered her magical powers when she was young, and she's been learning how to cast spells ever since. Her goal is to become a master wizard, so she's always eager to test out her magic against enemies. Marina's job on an adventuring team is to cast her spells to support her teammates and help them deal with monsters.
These character sheets are better fleshing out the characters in this movie than the movie is.
Than the movie did, yeah.
That rules.
Marina can cast any one of these spells. So here's her spells. These are the spells listed on her character sheet. Magic Missile, Marina can cast this spell twice in one day, so she has Magic Missile, which implies that the Chain Lightning I noticed earlier is actually a souped-up Magic Missile.
That would make sense.
Yeah. She also has Detect Magic. This spell allows Marina to know when magic is nearby and whether any item she looks at is magical. And also, she has a magical item called the Capture Bracelet. This magical device lets Marina cast a magical lasso to snare an opponent. Marina is not a strong combatant, but is very good at casting spells. This means that it's probably smart for her to stay behind the front lines and use her spells. Marina is the smartest member of the group.
Oh.
And now...
Oh.
So Elwood is a dwarf fighter. His full name is Elwood Gutworthy, and he is a stalwart fighter with an earthy sense of humor and a tremendous appetite for life. Although he has a quick temper, he stands by those who earn his respect. Elwood is a dwarf. The dwarves stand about 4 feet tall, and this is funny because the actor is not 4 feet tall. He is much taller, and weigh around 150 pounds. Elwood's job in an adventuring team is to kill monsters and protect his teammates. Elwood is the strongest person in the party. Elwood is extremely vain about his baldness and wears a helmet to cover it. Whenever Elwood gets hit, roll 3 dice. If you roll a 10 or better, the helmet stays on. Should he lose his helmet, Elwood becomes berserk and adds 1 to his attack bonus, for a total of +9, and 1 to his damage. Elwood won't run from battle without his helmet. Elwood doesn't get the bonus if he removes his own helmet, but he does if his friends knock his helmet off. And the strategy they suggest is Elwood is tough and deals mighty blows with his war axe, so he should protect the other characters by going into combat first.
Excellent. Oh, and here's Snails.
And here's Snails, a human rogue. Snails is an accomplished thief and Ridley's best friend. In fact, he claims to have taught Ridley everything he knows. Unlike Ridley, Snails is comfortable with his lot in life. Snails tempers Ridley's daring plans with reason. While Ridley is a thinker, Snails is a talker, taking full advantage of his suave nature and boyish good looks. Snails is his nickname. He prefers to keep his real name a secret.
Oh, okay.
Like, you said, this is more characterization than they get in the movie.
It's true. Like, I would not have described Snails as a suave talker.
Yeah.
Because most of the time that we see him doing that, like, specifically when he's talking to Norda, he's getting rebuffed.
Yeah, he is, like, making no headway.
Yeah.
Snails is sneaky, so he can slip ahead and look around. He's the quickest member of the group and good at spotting things others may miss. Which is not really reflected in his character in the movie at all.
They put more thought into these character sheets than they did into the characters for the actual movie.
Yeah, so this character sheet is actually developed and published by, like, Wizards of the Coast. So there were, like, professional D&D writers working on this.
This is fun.
This is fun. And yeah, that's the those are the 4 characters featured in the sewers of Sumdal, which I would love to play at some point for this, but now that we finally discussed everything we want to discuss with the movie, it's time, I think, for what we're all here for.
It's time for the dragon scale.
Yes, so since this is the first episode, I shall explain. So, when we originally conceived of this idea, this idea was conceived of after, like, a movie night. We went through Amazon Prime and saw a bunch of shitty fantasy movies with dragons in them, and got curious as to, like, oh, I wonder how, like, there are so many dragons, like, in these movies. I wonder how, like, they actually feature in these films and what they're like. And that would be an interesting thing to talk about and a good excuse to watch movies together and riff on them.
And just have fun.
Yeah, and just have fun. So I developed a scoring system for the many dragons we will spot in our media journey together, henceforth dubbed the Dragon Scale. and it
This is
has it has five aspects that are sort of weighted differently that contribute to the overall total score. Those being taxonomy, which is basically how dragon is this dragon? Can we call this a dragon, or are we kind of pushing the line here? And just to get out ahead of this discussion, because we are talking about the D&D movie, so I know some D&D people will listen to this. I don't really give a shit about how Gary Gygax categorized dragons taxonomically. Like, don't come here with any of that, well, it only has 2 legs and wings, so it's technically a wyvern and not a dragon shit. No. First of all, even in the Dungeons and Dragons manual, those are all categorized as dragons as a category. And also, second point, that historically has never been the case for dragons. They are kind of
also
all over the place in history and culture.
also, if you're gonna get your panties in a twist about the way that we classify dragons in the movie Dungeons and Dragons, I hate to be actually no, I love to be the bearer of bad news for you specifically. This entire podcast is going to be filled with the to the brim with things that you're gonna go, that's actually not a dragon, and we're gonna go, and we don't care.
Yeah,
Oh, good lord.
yeah,
Oh, good lord, do we not care?
yeah. My one criteria for dragons, as to can I call this a dragon? My minimum criteria is, would a medieval scribe doodle this in the sidebar of their illuminated manuscript and say, here there be a dragon? Because medieval art of dragons is fucking wacky. They are all over the place.
It's
And
nuts.
isn't it better to experience the full breadth of culture instead of getting lost in pedantry? I think so.
The amount of times that I was in a some kind of history or archaeology class and they would show us an image on the board of some kind of like vessel or decoration on an ancient building and point to it and say like, "Oh, this is their rendition of a lion." And you're like, "That is a fish? That is a fish with legs." And no, that's a lie. That's what we're doing here. These are
Yeah,
dragons.
these are
These are
dragons.
dragons.
So, yeah, first category is taxonomy, which I believe we've thoroughly established. Second category, elegance. Is this dragon elegant? Does it look impressive? Does it move with grace? Would I commission this as a cool baroness to have emblazoned on my tapestries?
Would I put this on my pirate flag?
Yeah, elegance. Because
Elegant.
dragons are tradition, like, I mean, in some traditions, dragons are elegant creatures. You know, they kind of have a prestige to them. The
Can I
second category, which I would, or the third category rather, which I would
can
say
I
is companion to this one.
can I
Oh wait.
interrupt you
Oh sure.
so I can see? Can I see it?
Oh
I
yes, of
I
course. Yeah, let me share the scale. Excuse me. Pardon
thank
me.
thank
Diana,
you.
I will bring up the scale so that you may look at it with your eyes.
Thank you.
But yes, category 3 is terror. Is this dragon terrifying? Does it command my respect? Is it, you know, does it exude power and menace in a way that a dragon should? And and then the last 2 categories are prominence and effectiveness. Prominence, of course, being how prominent is the dragon in this movie actually? Does it show up on screen a lot? Is it present throughout the story? And how important is it to the narrative actually? And then finally, effectiveness. Is this dragon used in a way that is effective to the plot? Is it effective as a dragon? Or could it be any kind of monster? Or could it be any kind of thing? Or could it just be not in the movie at all?
I don't know, Heather. I think we have a very good contender for this scale right off the bat.
Yeah. So obviously there are many dragons in this film. There's the gold dragons and the red dragons, but we're going to judge them as a whole here because they all
Yes.
kind of have a similar vibe. So taxonomy wise, I don't think there's any argument that this is a full on 10 out of 10.
Toe to tip, that's a dragon.
Those are
Like,
very explicitly classic Western style dragons.
classic Western style, and the movie also calls them dragons.
Yes, in universe and in the overall meta context, these are undeniably dragons.
Yeah.
Uh,
Elegance.
Elegance. Now, the CG doesn't do them a lot of credit,
But
but I would say in the final battle, they're making some interesting aerial maneuvers that I would say, they're bulky, but they're able to move throughout the twists and turns of the city towers. And
like,
the gold scales and the nice like plumage or
and like
horns or whatever you'd call it, their crest.
and the Empress is riding one. Like, I think they would have to be some kind of this has to be like a sleekness to them if you're going to ride a dragon.
I would argue they're a little bulgy for my tastes, but again, that's kind of the CGI not doing it much favors. I would put this at a solid maybe 8 in terms of elegance.
I was gonna pop it down to a 6.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves, Heather.
All right. You know what? Let's put our numbers together and give it a nice average 7.
I think that's very fair.
All right. Terror.
I am not afraid of these dragons.
Yeah. Well, terror doesn't necessarily mean like, being afraid of them, but like do these dragons command respect as beasts and forces of nature?
No.
The movie seems to want you to think so. I will say they do carpet bomb the shit out of that city.
That's true, but the city seems to recover very quickly. We
It
don't
seems to
see
recover
it
very quickly.
But the Empress gets rid of classism through a decree. Like, I assume that people still have, although I guess like people might respect her because they are terrified that she's going to carpet bomb the city again.
But we're not we're not so much talking about the Empress. We're talking about the dragons themselves. And when we get to the scene of the sewers, that dragon that's been imprisoned, they have it like rise up, and it is scary. It comes out swinging, breathes fire. A guy's lit on fire, gets tumbled down the stairs. There is some power to these creatures, but at the same time, I feel like they command sort of respect and fear, but also because they're being controlled and manipulated, and because we only get to see them like towards the very end of the movie, I feel like they don't have enough time to be menacing and like really establish that power. Like, we see Profian fail to control one once, and then the dragons are kind of sidelined until the very end, and this is kind of getting into the prominence aspect, but I think they're hinted at, like, their terror is more implied than shown, which is why I'd say maybe put this around a 6.
I was gonna agree. I agree with that entirely.
Yeah, they are terrifying, but more so as like a collective and as a device than as individual.
Yeah, these dragons are not the main character of this movie.
I might bump it up to a 6.5 because of their connection to like the magic of the world, and there's sort of some kind of like awe in that aspect.
Sure.
Although that might fit better in elegance than terror, but we'll just leave it at that. This is we're not gonna engage in pedantry after we just told our audience not to.
Yeah.
Now, prominence.
The
movie's called Dungeons and Dragons.
But they are really only here for the opening scene and then the climax. They're
Yeah.
used as a threat throughout the movie, yes, but
Yeah. I
I don't think that
feel
makes up for the fact that we don't see them.
Yeah. I feel like the staff is given more weight than the dragons that it
Correct.
controls. Like they talk a lot
Yeah.
about the staff but don't really mention the dragons nearly as much.
Yeah.
Like
I would say no more than a 5.
yeah, I would agree. Yeah, five in terms of prominence. Maybe bump it up to a 6 because we have the climax where there are just so many dragons all at once.
I know I'm gonna
Yeah.
push back on that because we don't see a lot of those dragons in detail.
Yeah.
I would leave it at
Yeah. So,
you put it at a 6.
oh, you said a 5. Sorry. Wait, you're right. My bad. Sorry, you dropped for a second there. I didn't hear you
Oh damn.
express your distaste at my misinput.
Damn.
But finally, effectiveness.
Effective.
I
They're
I
effective.
would yeah, I would give this a bit of a higher score actually because I think for what they are in the movie, I think it's effective because they are presenting these dragons as a kind of nuclear threat almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of force of nature that is at the beck and call of the ruling class. And the threat is the potential to disrupt this with a kind of mutually assured destruction situation. And I think
Hmm.
when we finally see like there is build up to that threat and I think the payoff is good for that. We see this city getting blown the fuck up and burned the fuck to the ground. I'd
Yeah.
say maybe a
I
7 for effectiveness.
I was gonna say a 6, but I will settle for a 7. This is not one of the ones that I'm gonna fight you much on.
Yeah, I'd say 7. Okay. Do we want to dole out any bonus points for this? Because we do
No,
have a bonus category. I agree, no bonus. I think this is going to be our set standard.
it's I think a 7 point something is because the final rating that we have right now without the bonus is a 7.025. And I
Yes.
think that is a very good standard to go with, especially considering how much we didn't even talk about the dragons, you know?
Yeah.
You know? I don't
You
think this
know.
needs any bonuses.
Yeah, the dragons are there in this movie, but they are not what is like the most interesting.
Yeah. But
Which
we have
honestly,
spotted them.
yeah, befitting of Dungeons and Dragons, honestly.
Well and truly, I can't blame them for that. And well and truly, I think that for our first time spotting dragons, this is a nice round number just in terms of like we found a movie that fit the bill right away.
Right away.
Right away.
So yeah, we're gonna settle that on the dragons in Dungeons and Dragons 2000. Get a final score of 7.025. Or 7 if you want to round. Which we
Yeah.
won't, because this is we are going to be very granular with our scaling, because we will be maintaining a ranked list of dragons that maybe
Nice.
once we get more on here, we
We'll
will
share.
return to it and view the rankings and maybe make adjustments if we think our minds have changed.
I noticed that you've named this movie Dragons and Dragons in our
I
spreadsheet.
sure have. We've been talking for a little bit. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons 2000.
Dungeon
Uh,
and Dragon 2000.
yeah, and the
One
dragons in this
one dungeon.
film, all of them. Oh,
All of them.
you can't be calling me out on the podcast. They're not seeing this. They don't have to
Yes, I
know.
can. Yes, I can.
But yeah, our time to dragon, I believe we put that at 3 minutes and 24 seconds.
Correct.
So a very short time to dragon, much to its credit, I would say. They don't
Yeah.
waste any of our time. And
None.
7.025.
Well, they were waiting to waste our time with the rest of the movie, but that's okay.
All right. Yeah, final score. 7.025. Currently rank 1 on our list, which is otherwise empty because we have only properly done one movie. But hopefully, dear listeners, there's more where that came from. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for checking out our fun little idea of a podcast, and we hope to see you with us in the future. I've
Yes.
I've been Heather,
I've been Diana, and I will continue to be.
and this has been Dragon Spotting.
Thanks
Have
and
a
bye.
Yeah, thanks and bye. Have a great time, and we will spot you later. That's awful. I
Spot you
don't know if we're
later.
gonna stick with that.
We should
Goodbye.
not.
We
Goodbye.
shouldn't. Goodbye.